Chapter 1827. At this moment the left commander who stood before Zhou Xian was filled with disbelief. He was an expert at the divine physique realm. However, he'd been injured by an ordinary person. How could this be possible? The left commander gazed at Zhou Xian. It's that sword technique of yours. At this moment he disowned how extraordinary Zhou Xian's sword technique was. Zhou Xian said with a smile, "Again." As soon as he finished speaking he suddenly vanished on the spot. A strand of sword light flashed through the battlefield. A wisp of ferocity flashed through the left commander's eyes. He didn't dodge and allowed Zhou Xian's sword to stab the center of his forehead. Bang! In an instant the left commander's body turned illusory, but it didn't take long for him to return to normal. After that both of them retreated explosively. As they retreated, Zhou Xian pressed his fingers together and made a slight movement. He'd taken the head with a single strike. The left commander's pupils constricted while his throat had been split open. However, his body turned illusory again in the next moment, and the injury on his throat had vanished when he returned to normal. Zhou Xian frowned when he witnessed this scene. He knew that once one attained the divine physique realm, one would possess a unique defensive ability. However, he was also aware that such a defensive ability couldn't be utilized frequently because it consumed a huge amount of energy. At this moment, fear had appeared in the left commander's eyes. After all, these sword techniques that Zhou Xian had executed were already capable of posing a material threat to him. There's something strange about this young man. Meanwhile, Jingji and Shaoan suddenly stopped in the distance. Jingji placed her left hand on the hilt of her sword as she gazed at Shaoan and smiled. "You're much weaker than before." Shaoan spoke softly, "You're much stronger than before." Jingji smiled, "You'll surpass me if you work hard. However, I won't give you the time to do so." Shaoan gazed at Jingji, "Then let's continue." Jingji was just about to attack when she seemed to have noticed something, and she suddenly turned to look at Zhou Xian. "You're still alive?" Zhou Xian smiled. "Are you very disappointed?" Jingji gazed at the left commander. The left commander spoke solemnly, "Hallowed Lord, he isn't simple at all." "Not simple?" Jingji looked at Zhou Xian and said with a smile, "Looks like you're not ordinary." Zhou Xian glanced at the sword in Jingji's hand and asked, "Are you a swordsman?" Jingji nodded. "Yes. Swordsman." Zhou Xian looked at Jingji and said, "Let's make a bet. Do you dare?" "What bet?" Jingji asked with a smile. Zhou Xian said, "I'll take a strike from you. If I do, give me another month." Jingji shook his head and smiled. "Why should I bet with you?" "No." Zhou Xian suddenly raised his head. "The supreme law of the universe. Help." Everyone. In the starry sky there was no movement at all. Zhou Xian felt a little awkward. At this time Jingji suddenly frowned. She turned her head and saw a woman slowly walking over from a distance. It was Fan Duo. Fan Duo looked at Zhou Xian and didn't say anything. Seeing Fan Duo, Zhou Xian hurriedly said, "Master, you're here." "Master." Hearing Zhou Xian's words, Jingji slightly frowned and looked at Fan Duo. "You're on the same side." Fan Duo was about to speak when Zhou Xian hurriedly said, "Of course we're on the same side." Fan Duo glanced at Zhou Xian and didn't say anything. Jingji smiled. "I don't think you're on the same side." Zhou Xian hurriedly walked to Fan Duo and bowed slightly. "Beautiful master, please help me." Fan Duo smiled. "For your sake or for her sake?" Zhou Xian said, "For Dao Yi's sake." After a moment of silence, Fan Duo looked at Jingji and said, "We're on the same side." In the end she still chose to form a good relationship with Zhou Xian. Because she was invincible. Jingji smiled. "So be it. It doesn't matter." Zhou Xian looked at Jingji. "In terms of numbers we're even. If we fight head-on you don't have a 100% chance of winning, right?" Jingji nodded. "Yes." Zhou Xian said, "It took you half a month to get here from ancient God world. In other words, if you continue to call for reinforcements, it will take another half a month, right?" Jingji looked at Zhou Xian and said with a smile, "So, you want to buy Lord and Wuju in half a month's time?" "No, if that small tower of yours is really a divine weapon like fire to said, 10 years inside is 1 day outside and half a month's time tsk. Little brother, you really calculated well." Zhou Xian smiled. "You're really smart just like me." Jingji laughed. "You're really interesting little fellow. Come, didn't you want to take my sword? Are you ready?" At the side Fan Duo suddenly said, You don't have to take her sword. Jingji smiled. If you don't, then we'll fight now until my people arrive. Yi Xian suddenly looked at Xiaoan. How's her character? Xiaoan said indifferently, if her character is good, she wouldn't have betrayed us in the first place. Yi Xian looked at Jingji. Your character isn't very good. Jingji smiled. Character is like face, it's the most useless thing in this world. What's the use of it? Yi Xian was speechless. Xiao Ta suddenly said, Little Lord, you've met your match. Yi Xian's face was full of black lines. This kind of shameless person was a bit difficult to deal with. Jingji suddenly put his left hand on the hilt of his sword and smiled. Since you don't want to take my sword, then let's fight until my people arrive in half a month. With that, she was about to attack. At this time, Yi Xian suddenly said, I'll take your sword. Xiaoan suddenly appeared by Yi Xian's side and shook her head. You're not a match for her. Yi Xian smiled. It's just a single strike. It's fine. Xiaoan frowned slightly and was about to speak when Yi Xian smiled and said, Don't worry. Jingji suddenly smiled and said, Bring it on. As she spoke, she suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian, and she was about to draw her sword with her left hand. However, the corners of her mouth curled up slightly in the next moment, and then she slammed her right fist towards Yi Xian's head. This sudden turn of events caused Yi Xian's expression to change drastically. Damn it. This woman isn't using her sword but her fists. She doesn't play by the rules. At this critical moment, Yi Xian utilized his sword domain. Invincible sword domain. Bang. Yi Xian instantly retreated 30 kilometers away, and the reason he stopped was because Xiaoan had appeared behind him. Yi Xian clenched his fists tightly, and his entire body was trembling. His sword domain had been destroyed. His body had almost been destroyed. No, if it wasn't for Xiaoan, then his body would have been destroyed. It was Xiaoan who forcefully protected his body. Jingji suddenly smiled and said, Your sword domain was very interesting. Yi Xian took a deep breath and then he looked at Jingji and grinned. Didn't you say you would use your sword? Jingji smiled. What realm are you at? What realm am I at? It's like the difference between the heavens and the earth. However, you dared to ask me to draw my sword. There's definitely something fishy about this. Even though I don't know what it is, I know that you definitely have a way to resist my sword. So I didn't draw my sword. Yi Xian smiled. I was careless. Jingji roared with laughter. However, I'm quite curious. I'm curious about why you think you can resist my sword. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. Because I'm a swordsman. I just want to experience a powerful sword cultivator. I don't have any other intentions. Jingji looked at Yi Xian. Really? Yi Xian nodded. Really? Jingji blinked. Then take my sword again, I'll let you see a powerful swordsman. Don't worry, I promise you that this time I'll really draw my sword. Yi Xian smiled. How about this, you take my sword first. Then I'll take your sword. What do you think? Jingji smiled and didn't say anything. Yi Xian laughed. You're not afraid that I'll kill you in a second, are you? Jingji smiled. You're trying to provoke me. Yi Xian smiled. I still have a very powerful sword technique and I think it should be able to pose a threat to you. But I'm not sure. The left general suddenly said, Holy Lord, this person's sword technique is indeed quite good. A powerful sword technique. Jingji smiled. Now that you mention it, I'm a little interested. Come, I'll take your sword. I hope your powerful sword technique doesn't disappoint me. Yi Xian wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. You don't mind if I treat my injuries first? Jingji smiled. I don't mind. Yi Xian nodded, sat down cross-legged and began to treat his injuries. Jingji suddenly looked at Xiaoan and smiled. And Wu Juan, I didn't expect you to know such an interesting person. How interesting. Xiaoan slowly closed his eyes and didn't say anything. Jingji didn't look for trouble, she looked at the Supreme Law Fan Duo. Your Excellency, do you really want to get involved in this mess? Fan Duo was silent. Jingji continued, he's getting involved in the ancient god world's affairs. Do you know about the ancient god world? It's a place where the martial arts civilization is higher than this universe. If you get involved with him, I'm afraid it won't end well. Fan Duo asked, do you know him? Jingji glanced at Yi Xian. Him? Fan Duo smiled, yes. Jingji smiled, you know nothing about the ancient god world. Fan Duo said, you know nothing about that woman. Jingji's eyes narrowed. That woman? Fan Duo smiled, there's no need to say more. I'll take this good karma. Even if it turns into an ill-fated karma, I won't regret it. Jingji suddenly turned to Yi Xian and smiled. It seems you really aren't simple. At this moment Yi Xian suddenly stood up and walked toward Jingji. Miss, I created this sword technique myself. It's extremely powerful, you have to be careful. Jingji smiled. All right. Yi Xian suddenly disappeared. Jingji narrowed her eyes and pressed her left thumb against the hilt of her sword. At this moment Yi Xian appeared in front of her. Jingji flicked his left thumb and the sword suddenly flew out. At this moment Yi Xian's sword fell. At the instant Yi Xian's sword descended, the expressions of everyone present changed drastically. Sword intent. At this moment Yi Xian used the sword intent left behind by his father. Boom. In front of everyone's eyes, Jingji was suddenly sent flying. And the moment he was sent flying, his body directly shattered and countless streams of light scattered. Her divine body shattered. However, her soul was forcibly preserved. Jingji looked up at Yi Xian. This isn't your sword intent. Yi Xian asked. It's mine. Jingji narrowed his eyes. It's not yours. Yi Xian said seriously. What's my father's is mine. Is there a problem? Everyone. P.S. A reader named Unfettered One asked me to ask. How can it be cured in such a short time? Chapter 1828. At this moment, everyone in the surroundings was shocked. Yi Xian destroyed Jingji's body with one sword strike. Of course, they were not shocked by Yi Xian's strength, but the sword Dao will that Yi Xian displayed just now. That was just a wisp of sword Dao will. Jingji suddenly smiled. Everyone looked at Jingji. Jingji looked at Yi Xian and said with a smile, It seems that I need to know you well. Yi Xian said with a smile, We can get to know each other better. Jingji smiled brightly, Definitely. After saying that, she and the people around her returned to the palace. In the next moment, the 9 dragons pulled the palace and slowly disappeared into the starry sky. Yi Xian said softly, Can you stop them from leaving? Shaoan shook his head, No. Yi Xian turned to look at Shaoan. Her body has been destroyed. Can't we kill her? Shaoan shook his head, No. Yi Xian was silent. Shaoan suddenly asked, That wisp of sword Dao will? Yi Xian said with a smile, It belongs to my father. Shaoan nodded slightly, Your father is really powerful. Just like your sister. Yi Xian suddenly said, I have an elder brother who is as powerful as my father and my sister. Shao An's expression froze. At the side, Fondwa's face couldn't help but twitch. This guy is simply a freak. At this moment Yi Xian suddenly said, Shaoan, how long do you think they will come again? Shaoan looked into the depths of the starry sky. She didn't leave. He just escaped into the space-time. She will wait for her people to come. 10 days at most. After 10 days her people will come. Yi Xian said in a low voice, So, we only have 100 years? Shaoan nodded, Yes. Yi Xian asked, Is it enough? Shaoan glanced at Yi Xian. It's completely enough. But since you helped me, she and the ancient devil won't let you go. Yi Xian asked, If I don't help you, will they let me go? Shaoan shook his head. No. Yi Xian smiled and said, Meeting you and getting to know you, is it my misfortune? Shao An's expression gradually turned cold. Forget it. Yi Xian smiled and said, But I don't regret it. With that he turned around and left. Shaoan was stunned and then his cold expression gradually softened. Fan Duo spoke abruptly, Be careful of him. He's gaudy and skilled at deceiving women. Shaoan said, I think he's pretty down to earth. With that she turned around and left. Fan Duo shook her head and sighed. Practical? Is this bastard honest? This was the biggest joke in the universe. At this moment Swan Yi suddenly appeared on the field. Tong Yi glanced at Yi Xian and Shaoan in the distance. Who is that woman? Fan Duo said, Ancient God World. Tao Yi frowned slightly. That place. Fan Duo glanced at Tao Yi. You seem to know. Tao Yi said indifferently, I know about Tao Yi. I heard that the people there think highly of themselves and call themselves gods. With that she paused and said, How did Yi Xian provoke the people of that place? Fan Duo said indifferently, Guess. Swan Yi looked at Fan Duo. Even if you don't know how powerful the ancient god world is, you should know that it's not an ordinary place. Yet you still stand on his side. This means that the woman behind him is even more terrifying than the ancient god world. Fan Duo smiled. 20 what? You've given up on killing him? Why? Xuan Yi said indifferently, is there any benefit in killing him? If there is, then there is only one benefit, and that is to vent my anger. But it's not worth it to lose my life for this anger. Fan Duo chuckled. I thought you would target him to death. Xuan Yi stared at Fan Duo. What is his background? Fan Duo shook her head. I don't know either. With that she turned around and left. Xuan Yi stood there in silence. At this time an old man suddenly appeared in front of Xuan Yi. It was the Left General from before. The Left General said, Your Excellency, my holy lord invites you. Xuan Yi smiled. Invite me? The Left General nodded. Holy Lord said to chat. Chat. Xuan Yi thought for a moment then smiled. Sure. The Left General said, Please. The two disappeared into the starry sky. Soon Xuan Yi arrived in an unknown starry sky. Xuan Yi looked into the distance and saw a floating palace. It was Jingji's palace. Xuan Yi followed the Left General to the front of the palace. As soon as they arrived, Jingji came out to greet them. At this time she had recovered her physical body. Jingji smiled. Welcome, Supreme Xuan Yi. Xuan Yi smiled. Holy Lord can call me Xuan Yi. Jingji blinked. Then I won't be polite. Xuan Yi, I am an honest person and don't like to beat around the bush. I invited you here this time because I want to invite you to deal with Yi Xian and Supreme Fan Duo. Xuan Yi smiled. Shouldn't it be Little N? Jingji smiled. Yes. It's good that we have a common enemy. Xuan Yi smiled and did not speak. Jingji looked into the distant starry sky and smiled. Xuan Yi, can you tell me about Yi Xian? I don't know much about him. Xuan Yi was silent for a moment then said, He is not a simple person. His background is mysterious and the person behind him is very powerful. Jingji looked at Xuan Yi and asked, How powerful is the person behind him? Xuan Yi shook her head. I don't know. I don't know. Jingji chuckled and said, How interesting. I didn't expect to meet a second generation. Xuan Yi said, Ordinary forces cannot raise a person like Yi Xian. He must have a powerful force behind him. Looking at this universe, other than the ancient god realm, are there any other powerful forces? Jingji knew, too. One is the ancient demon and the other is the very one. She shook her head and smiled, but he can't be from these two forces. Xuan Yi frowned. Are you sure? Jingji nodded. Yes. Xuan Yi was silent. Jingji smiled. It looks like there are powerful forces we don't know about. Then she looked at Xuan Yi. Miss Xuan Yi, do you have any plans? Xuan Yi smiled. I need to go into seclusion for a while. Jingji blinked. You won't join us to deal with Yi Xian and Supreme Fan Duo? Xuan Yi shook her head. I'm tired. I don't like fighting and killing anymore. Good luck to you, Sacred Lord. Then she turned around and left. Jingji watched Xuan Yi leave and smiled but didn't say anything. Beside her, Zhou Xian suddenly said, Sacred Lord, we can't give Yi Xian and Lord and Wu that much time. Jingji smiled. Of course I know we can't give them that much time, but the problem is how do we kill them? Are you going to kill them? Zhou Xian lowered her head. Jingji slowly closed her eyes. How long until our people and the ancient demon clan arrive? Zhou Xian said, Our people need about 9 days and the ancient demon clan should arrive in 7 days. Jingji suddenly said, Tell our people that if they don't arrive in 7 days, I will shatter their souls. Then she glanced at Zhou Xian. Don't lose to the ancient demon clan and everything. It's too embarrassing. Zhou Xian hurriedly lowered her head. Understood. Jingji said again. Also help me do one thing, and that is to investigate Yi Xian. The more detailed the better. Don't leave out any details including how many times he pees a day, understand? Zhou Xian hesitated then said, Sacred Lord, we also need to investigate how many times he pees a day. This. Jingji looked at Zhou Xian. How many times he pees a day we can infer whether he has a weak kidney, understand? Zhou Xian. Jingji didn't say anything else, turned around and left. Inside Xiao Ta's room. Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground with his eyes closed. Healing. He hadn't fully recovered from the previous battle with Jingji. Half an hour later Yi Xian took a deep breath, his injuries were all healed. Yi Xian went to Shaoan. Help me achieve divine body. Divine body. The battle with Jingji made him understand that there was still a big gap between him and Shaoan and Jingji. He had to reach the divine body realm. Only when he reached the divine body realm could he fight with Shaoan and Jingji. Shaoan said, "As long as they don't trouble you during this time, there won't be a problem." Xian said, "No matter what, we have to hurry." Shaoan nodded, "Let's start now." In the following time, Shaoan began to help Xian improve with all his strength. Somewhere in the starry sky, Jingji sat in front of the main hall, reading an ancient book with great interest. At this moment, Zhujiang suddenly appeared in front of Jingji. Zhujiang bowed slightly, then took out a scroll and handed it to Jingji. "Sacred Lord, this is all the information on Xian." Jingji put down the ancient book in her hand and took the scroll. After reading for a while, she gradually frowned. After a long time, Jingji put down the scroll and said softly, "Don't touch this person. Don't touch this person." Zhujiang frowned slightly and he hesitated for a moment before he said, "Sacred Lord, although the woman in a plain dress and the man in green are strong, they might only be experts at the body form realm." "Idiot!" Jingji suddenly interrupted Zhujiang. "If they're really only at the body form realm, how could they destroy my divine body with a strand of sword Dao will? And that woman in a plain dress wiped out 1,000,000 living beings with a single strike of her sword. Although I can do it as well, you've overlooked something, and that's how much strength she used to wipe out those powerful living beings. Is 100% of her strength the same as 10% of her strength?" Zhujiang fell silent. Jingji continued, "Besides that, Supreme Fandua was still willing to help Xian after seeing us. Why? Is she out of her mind? No. It's because she feels that the person behind Xian is stronger than us." As she spoke, she stood up and said, "The divine object that Xian has, 10 years inside the object is 1 day outside. Not to mention me, even the god ancestor couldn't achieve such a divine sense. And to achieve this, there's only one possibility, and that is to reverse the spacetime of this current universe. Not only that, but to reverse the spacetime of our universe." Speaking of this, she looked up at the starry sky and a trace of fear flashed in her eyes. "I speculate that the woman in a plain dress is very likely to have jumped out of this current universe." Chapter 1829. Jump out of the current universe. The Left General suddenly said, "How is that possible?" Jingji smiled and said, "Why not?" The Left General said in a deep voice, "Holy Lord, even in Wujuan and the Demon Lord couldn't jump out of the current universe. How can anyone do that?" Jingji frowned and said, "What kind of logic is that? Just because they can't jump out of the current universe doesn't mean others can't?" The Left General smiled bitterly. "They are all geniuses among geniuses," Jingji asked again. "Then how can you be sure that no one is more talented than them?" The Left General was speechless. Jingji smiled and said, "Don't measure everyone with your own thinking and knowledge because some people may be beyond our understanding. Do you understand?" The Left General nodded slightly. "I understand." She paused for a moment before continuing, "But Holy Lord, if the person behind him is as powerful as you think, what should we do now? Give up?" Jingji shook her head. "We can't give up." The Left General frowned and said in confusion, "Why?" Jingji smiled and said, "Let the ancient demon clan fight him." The Left General was shocked. "This?" Jingji blinked and said, "We know that the person behind him is powerful, but do the ancient demon clan know? We don't. Moreover, the ancient demon clan is also very powerful. Let them fight against Xian and we will support them from behind. Isn't that good?" The Left General said in a deep voice, "Will the ancient demon clan fight against Xian?" Jingji smiled and said, "Yes." The Left General asked, "Why?" Jingji smiled and said, "Because Xian has already joined forces within Wujuan. We don't dare give in Wujuan too much time and the ancient demon clan doesn't dare to. Of course we need to do something." With that she slowly closed her eyes. The Left General did not dare to disturb her. He knew that his Holy Lord was up to something again. After a long time she suddenly opened her eyes and said, "Inform the ancient demon clan that in Wujuan's strength is rapidly recovering. If they don't hurry, and Wujuan at his peak will appear in front of them again." The Left General bowed slightly and then retreated. Jingji lay on the chair. After a while she smiled and picked up the ancient book in her hand to continue reading. Inside Xiao. Under Xiao En's guidance, Xian had truly improved by leaps and bounds. At this moment Yi Xian finally understood how important it was to have someone to guide him, because he could avoid taking too many detours. Originally, he was already half a step into the divine physique echelon, and after several years of bitter cultivation, he had now reached the most crucial moment of forging his divine physique. But there was a small problem. Divine power. He had to borrow the power of a god to create a divine body. In front of Yi Xian, Xiaoan said in a deep voice, "I overlooked a problem, and that is that there is no divinity power in this universe of yours." Yi Xian smiled bitterly. "Sis, is this a joke?" Xiaoan shook his head. "I've neglected this problem." Yi Xian said gravely, "Only divine power can do it?" Xiaoan nodded. Yi Xian glanced at Xiaoan. Xiaoan said, "I have divine power, but if I forge a divine body for you, it will consume a lot of divine power. If that's the case, I won't be able to progress any further. Once their people and the powerful ancient demons arrive, we will be in great danger. Besides, even if I use my divine power, it might not be enough for you." After a moment of silence, Yi Xian said, "Can I use another power?" Xiaoan asked, "What power?" Yi Xian said, "Qing'er's power." Xiaoan was slightly taken aback. Then he said, "You can contact her?" Yi Xian shook his head. "I can't." But, as he spoke, he opened his palm and the Qingxian sword suddenly appeared in his hand. The Qingxian sword. The Qingxian sword had broken through. Although only a few days had passed in the outside world, it had been decades in this Xiao. At this moment Little Soul had completely absorbed the souls from before. As for what level it had reached, even she did not know. Perhaps only Qing'er knew what level it was now. Little Soul suddenly said excitedly, "Young lord, do you want to fight?" Yi Xian laughed. "Little Soul, do you like to fight now?" Little Soul said, "I can devour more souls." Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. "You little guy." As he spoke, he looked at Xiaoan and said, "Xiaoan, I have a bold idea. I want to use this sword to forge a divine body for me. Not only does this sword contain formidable and terrifying power, but it also has the power of Qing. In terms of power, it should be enough." After a moment of silence, Xiaoan said, "I've never done it before. I've never heard of anyone doing it." Yi Xian smiled. "Then I'll be the first to do it." Xiaoan looked at Yi Xian. "Are you serious?" Yi Xian nodded. "I'm serious." Xiaoan said after a moment of silence, "I can give it a try. But I don't know what unforeseen consequences will occur." Yi Xian smiled. "It's fine as long as you don't die." Xiaoan glanced at Yi Xian. "Don't worry, you won't die with me here." Yi Xian laughed and said, "Then let's begin." As he spoke, he stabbed the green profound sword into his stomach. Bang! An extremely terrifying force suddenly erupted from within Yi Xian. In an instant Yi Xian's eyes opened wide, and he felt like his body was about to explode. Meanwhile, Xiaoan hurriedly said, "Circulate the mental cultivation technique I gave you quickly." Yi Xian didn't dare act carelessly, and he hurriedly circulated the mental cultivation technique Xiaoan had given him. It didn't take long for him to start absorbing Little Soul's energy. Yi Xian spoke solemnly, "Little Soul, will this really not harm you?" Little Soul chuckled. "It won't. It's just that young lord needs to bring me along in the future." Yi Xian laughed. "Of course." Little Soul said, "Continue. I feel like your absorption is a bit slow." Yi Xian was speechless. Xiaoan took a deep look at Little Soul. Yi Xian's absorption wasn't slow at all. In fact, it was extremely fast and it was a huge amount. But Little Soul said it was very slow. In other words, this sword was even more terrifying than she'd imagined. What level had this sword reached now? She didn't know. After this sword broke through, even she couldn't see through it. Just like that, time passed bit by bit. After Yi Xian devoured the energy contained within the green profound sword, his aura rose madly and explosively. Moreover, under Xiaoan's guidance, his body started to change bit by bit. However, she continued to stare at it with rapt attention. Because she'd never done this in the past and she was afraid that an accident would occur. After all, the energy within the green profound sword wasn't divine energy, so she wasn't sure if it would work. In any case, she had to give it a try first. Time passed slowly and Yi Xian's aura grew stronger and stronger. In the end, the entire world within the prison pagoda began to tremble. On the side, Xiaoan's expression became more and more solemn. The slightest carelessness could consign Yi Xian to eternal damnation. About 2 hours later, Yi Xian's body began to tremble violently. Xiaoan frowned slightly. How do you feel now? Yi Xian's voice trembled. I feel like I'm about to explode. Xiaoan said solemnly, the energy contained within this sword is too terrifying. Saying so, she looked at Yi Xian. Can you hold on? Yi Xian said, just barely. Xiaoan nodded. Circulate the energy within your body according to the method I've taught you. Yi Xian said, okay. Saying so, he began to slowly guide the powerful energy within his body. In this way, time passed little by little. About a day later, Yi Xian found his body was slowly transforming. Xiaoan said solemnly, your body is transforming, and this proves that this method is feasible. However, you must not be careless. Yi Xian nodded. He naturally didn't dare to be careless because this was no joke. Xiaoan stared at Yi Xian. At this moment, Yi Xian's body was transforming at a speed visible to the naked eye. But she noticed that sword threads were actually concealed within Yi Xian's skin. Xiaoan couldn't help but frown when she saw this scene. Sword threads? Is it because of the sword? Of course not. It's because Yi Xian had combined it with his invincible sword physique when he was cultivating his divine physique. He'd only wanted to give it a try, but he hadn't expected that it would actually work. Divine physique combined with invincible sword physique. Just like that, a month passed. At this moment, Yi Xian's aura had calmed down. All of a sudden, Yi Xian got to his feet. As soon as he stood up, the space around him was torn apart. Xiaoan spoke softly. He did it. He did it. Yi Xian opened his eyes and raised his hands slightly. In an instant, the wrinkled space he'd created shattered once more. Meanwhile, Xiaoan spoke abruptly, this isn't your divine physique. Yi Xian gazed at Xiaoan and she spoke solemnly, this is even more terrifying than your divine physique. As she spoke, she gazed at Yi Xian. You added another mental cultivation technique. Yi Xian nodded, the invincible sword physique. Now I have both a divine physique and a sword physique. Currently, there were countless sword threads concealed within his body. It was extremely effective when he fought others in close combat. Xiaoan said, let me explain the profundities of the divine physique to you. Yi Xian hurriedly replied, all right. Even though he'd attained the divine physique realm, he was still quite unsteady and unfamiliar with this realm. Fortunately, he had Xiaoan by his side. After that, Yi Xian started to familiarize himself with this realm under Xiaoan's guidance. In some unknown part of the starry sky, Jingji sat before a hall, and there was a pile of ancient books by her side. During this period of time, she'd been reading when she had nothing to do. Reading was one of her hobbies. Suddenly, the left general appeared in front of Jingji and he bowed slightly. Hallowed Lord, a fiend envoy from the ancient devil clan has arrived. Jingji blinked and then he said, invite him in quickly. The left general withdrew, and it didn't take long for him to arrive before a black-robed old man. The black-robed old man bowed slightly. Hallowed Lord. The left general hurriedly said, you're finally here. The black-robed old man glanced at Jingji and then he said, hasn't Wujuan recovered her strength? Jingji shook her head, not yet. However, she won't just recover her strength in 3 days at most, she'll even become stronger than before. The black-robed old man frowned slightly. Why? Jingji said in a low voice, because she met a man who possesses a lot of divine objects and one of them is a Xiaota. That pagoda is extremely terrifying. 100 years inside it is equivalent to a day outside. The left general looked at Jingji and he was slightly dumbfounded. The black-robed old man's frown deepened. How is that possible? Jingji said seriously, it's absolutely true. It's said that this object came from outside the universe, and it's now recognized that young man as its master. Moreover, he's now together with An Wujuan. What a headache. Moreover, he helped An Wujuan fight against me and he even said that he would bring An Wujuan back to the ancient god world and massacre the ancient devil clan. The left general was speechless. P.S. The question I asked yesterday was really asked by a reader. He told me that he's always somewhat powerless and I'm not a doctor so I definitely don't know. So, I helped him. I swear on my character that I really helped him. Chapter 1830. Bathe the ancient devil clan in blood? A wisp of ridicule arose on the corners of the old man's mouth. Him? Jingji sighed softly. Demon envoy, don't underestimate him. He's so young, yet his combat strength is terrifyingly formidable. The old man glanced at Jingji and asked, "What's his background?" Jingji hesitated for a moment and said, "His background is ordinary. He was just lucky enough to obtain a few divine artifacts and change his fate. As you know, such things are common even in our world." The old man frowned slightly. "He even threatened to annihilate my ancient devil clan and the hallowed halls?" Jingji nodded, "Yes." The old man was slightly puzzled. Why would he dare to say that? Jingji grinned brightly. "Of course, it's because he doesn't understand the ancient devil clan at all. If he did, would he dare to say that?" The old man nodded slightly. "In that case, he's just a petty person intoxicated by success." Jingji withdrew his smile and spoke seriously. "Even though he's quite arrogant, his combat strength can't be underestimated." The old man asked, "Where is he now?" Jingji hesitated for a moment and said, "It's quite risky to look for him now. Why don't we wait for our people to arrive?" The old man shook his head. "They're just two people. What's there to fear?" Jingji thought for a moment and said, "All right. I'll help you hold in Wujuan back while you deal with that young man, all right?" The old man hesitated for a moment and said, "How's in Wujuan's strength now?" Jingji spoke solemnly, "He's at least 80% recovered. But don't worry, I'll keep him busy. Even if I die in battle, I won't allow him to interfere with you killing that young man." The old man glanced at Jingji. "The hallowed lord is very loyal." Jingji smiled. "Then let's go look for that young man now." The old man nodded. "All right." It didn't take long for them to vanish into the starry sky. Shaoan, who was teaching Yi Xian in the Xiaota, suddenly looked up. "They're here." Yi Xian nodded. The two of them left Xiaota. As soon as they left Xiaota, Jingji and the others appeared before them. Yi Xian glanced at Jingji and then at the black-robed elder beside him. "Ancient demon clan?" Shaoan nodded. Jingji glanced at Yi Xian and said with a smile, "Little brother, we meet again." She looked at the black-robed elder beside her and said, "This is the demon envoy of the ancient demon clan. Brother, he wants to see your magical Xiaota. Can you take it out for me to see?" Yi Xian smiled. "I'm afraid not." Jingji turned to look at the demon envoy, a bit helpless. "He doesn't give me any face." The demon envoy lightly said, "Why bother wasting words with him?" Then he looked at Yi Xian. "Are you the one who said you wanted to destroy the ancient demons?" Yi Xian frowned. "Did I say that?" Next to him, Jingji suddenly said, "You did." Yi Xian looked at Jingji. "You framed me." Jingji blinked. "Do you know what kind of relationship An Wujuan has with us? We are mortal enemies. But you helped him, so you are our mortal enemy." Yi Xian looked at Jingji. "What kind of game are you playing?" Jingji smiled. "Young Master Yi, how about this? We will kill An Wujuan and you don't interfere. Don't worry, as long as you don't interfere, we won't target you." Yi Xian suddenly smiled. "You investigated me." Jingji suddenly disappeared. He directly attacked. However, he did not attack Yi Xian. Instead, he attacked An, who was next to him. After attacking, Jingji said, "Demon envoy, I will stall An Wujuan. You quickly kill that boy." Hearing Jingji's words, the demon envoy's eyes fell on Yi Xian again. The next moment he disappeared. In the distance, Yi Xian suddenly pulled out his sword. In the distance, Yi Xian suddenly drew his sword. Boom. The sword light shattered and the demon envoy retreated thousands of feet away. When he stopped, his body instantly cracked. The demon envoy was stunned. Not only the demon envoy, but Jingji, who was secretly watching from the side, was also stunned. Damn. This guy became stronger again. Xiaota really has that kind of terrifying ability. Yi Xian has reached the divine physique echelon. This guy crossed so many realms in one go? In the distance, the demon envoy looked at Yi Xian in disbelief. Yi Xian was about to attack but seemed to think of something. He turned his head and looked at Shaoan, who had stopped, and said with a smile, "Let's go." Shaoan glanced at Yi Xian and didn't ask why. She walked to Yi Xian's side and left. Jingji didn't stop them. At this time, the demon envoy walked to Jingji's side and was about to speak when Jingji suddenly slashed with his sword. Before the demon envoy could react, he was directly wiped out. Not far away, the left general's eyes were filled with disbelief. "Holy Lord," Jingji blinked. "Did I kill him?" The left general was stunned and then he said, "Yi Xian killed him." Jingji smiled. "How smart." The left general said in a low voice. Holy Lord Yi Xian has become stronger again. If the ancient demon clan finds out about his origins, I'm afraid they won't choose to fight him to the death. Jingji said softly, the ancient demon clan will fight them to the death. Because they don't dare to let Lord and Wu grow stronger. As she spoke, she slowly closed her eyes. I don't dare to either. He has the divine pagoda, and if he continues to cultivate like this, our hallowed church and the ancient demon clan won't be a match for them. Hearing this, the left general's face became serious. That demonist was slightly stronger than him, but just now Yi Xian had destroyed his body with a single slash of his sword. Not long ago, Yi Xian was slightly unable to defeat him. But now Yi Xian's strength has grown to such an extent. This speed of growth is too terrifying. Jingji suddenly said, help me investigate everyone around Yi Xian. The left general said in a low voice, Holy Lord, you mean? Jingji smiled. Everyone has a weakness, don't you think so? The left general nodded. Very well. Saying this, he turned and left. Jingji slowly closed her eyes and a moment later, she opened her palm and a black stone suddenly appeared in her hand. She muttered a few words, and the black stone turned into a black light that floated in front of her. Gradually, a shadow appeared in the black light. Jingji smiled. Things have changed. A moment later, the shadow said, has she recovered to her peak? Jingji shook her head. No. But soon. The shadow said, so soon. Jingji knew. She knows a man who has a divine artifact, Xiaota. The space inside the pagoda is different from our universe. It is said that 100 years inside is a day outside. The shadow said in a low voice, impossible. Jingji smiled. I also think it's impossible, but do you think there is a need to lie to you? The shadow fell silent. Jingji continued, just now that young man killed your demonic envoy. 2 days ago he was only a space-time realm profound practitioner, but now he is already at the divine physique realm. In a few days I believe he will reach the divine soul realm. The shadow said, why does he have such a divine artifact? Jingji smiled. He was lucky, I obtained it by chance. She naturally wouldn't say that someone had specially forged it for Yi Xian. What kind of person could forge such a divine artifact? After a long silence, the shadow said, if it is really as you said, and that the pagoda has such a divine aura, then why is that young man only at the divine physique realm? Jingji smiled. That's because he didn't know an Wujuan before. At that time he couldn't come into contact with people at our level. But now he knows an Wujuan and he has come into contact with a higher level of martial arts civilization. That's not the point. The point is that an Wujuan can now use his Xiaota to restore his full strength and reach a higher level. Think about it. If she uses Xiaota, would you and I still be a match for her? The shadow was silent. Jingji said, the two of them are working together. If we don't get rid of them now, we will be the ones getting rid of them in the future. After saying that, she paused and said, let's see if you want to fight or not. If you choose not to fight, then I will bring people back to the Saint Hall now. The shadow was silent for a moment. Wait for me. Jingji said, tell the very race that he has that divine artifact. The shadow asked, why? Jingji said softly, don't think about taking it for yourself. That is impossible. After thinking for a moment, the shadow said, don't tell the very race first. I will come personally. After saying that, the black light dissipated. Jingji shook her head and smiled. How greedy. But that's fine. As she said that, she suddenly turned her head. General of the right. An old man appeared in front of her. Jingji said, issue a wanted order to the entire universe for the people around Yi Xian. Anyone who kills anyone around him will get. After saying that, she frowned. What is so precious in this universe? The general of the right said, the divine level spring of immortality. Jingji smiled. Anyone who kills anyone around Yi Xian will get a divine level spring of immortality. The general of the right said, sacred leader, are you trying to delay Yi Xian and prevent him and an Wujuan from entering Xiaota to cultivate? Jingji nodded. If he cultivates for another month, I'm afraid I won't be his opponent. We can't give him that time. The general of the right nodded. Understood. After saying that, he disappeared. Jingji slowly closed her eyes. After a long time, she suddenly turned around and left. In some part of the universe, Yi Xian suddenly turned to look at Shaoan. Why don't you ask me why I want to leave? Shaoan said, tell me, I'll listen. If not, I won't listen. Yi Xian shook his head with a smile. Then do you want to know? Xiaoan nodded. Yi Xian said softly, what do you think of Jingji? After a moment of silence and said, sinister. Yi Xian said, she has investigated me. She must know about Dad and Qing, or she must be afraid of them, so she wants to use the ancient demon clan to fight me. She is not only scheming against me but also against the ancient demon clan. Xiaoan looked at Yi Xian. How are you going to deal with it? After a moment of silence, Yi Xian said, what we need is time, and what she is most afraid of is time. So she must be targeting us. At this moment, the space in front of him suddenly trembled. The Tower Master sent a message. After a moment, Yi Xian said with a smile, he has started to issue a wanted order for my family. Xiaoan asked again, how are you going to deal with it? Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. After a moment he said, Xiaoan, you all know about this universe. That is to say, there is a universe beyond this universe, right? Xiaoan nodded. Yes. Yi Xian looked at Xiaoan, do you believe that I am from outside the universe? Xiaoan hesitated and said, I believe you. Yi Xian. Chapter 1831. Yi Xian was speechless. Xiaoan, you believe my nonsense? Xiaoan looked at Yi Xian. I believe. Yi Xian was completely speechless. He believed that. Xiaoan suddenly said, tell me your plan. Yi Xian smiled. If I'm not wrong, that woman and the ancient demon race want to know my background. Since that's the case, I can tell them my background. Xiaoan said, outside the universe? Yi Xian nodded. Xiaoan asked, and then? Yi Xian said, scare them to death. Xiaoan. Yi Xian laughed. Xiaoan, you're so cute. As he spoke, he looked around and opened his palm. A voice transmission talisman appeared in his hand and he crushed it. A moment later, the building master appeared. Yi Xian smiled. Building master, do me a favor. The building master nodded. Brother Yi, speak. Yi Xian said, help me send a message to all the worlds. Say that I, Yi Xian, am from outside the universe. I'm an outsider. An outsider. The building master was shocked. Brother Yi, are you really an outsider? Yi Xian's face darkened. You believe me? The building master nodded. Of course. Yi Xian. He had to say he was indeed speechless. Why would anyone believe such nonsense? At this moment, the building master smiled bitterly. Brother Yi, do you know why I believe you? Yi Xian said, I'm curious. The building master said in a deep voice, because you're too mysterious. Not only you but the people behind you are also mysterious. Most importantly, your speed of improvement is too terrifying. When I first saw you, how strong were you? And now I can't see through you. Geniuses and monsters are all trash in front of you. In any case, you're too abnormal. So, I believe you when you say you're an outsider. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. Alright. Help me inform the myriad worlds that I am an outsider. Not only that, help me issue a bounty. Say that anyone who kills my family and friends will be rewarded with 100 spring of immortality, and anyone who kills me, Yi Xian, will be rewarded with 1,000 spring of immortality. The owner of the small building frowned slightly, his face full of confusion. Brother Yi, this is... Yi Xian smiled but said nothing. The small building's master suddenly said in a deep voice, I understand. 10 springs of eternal life. Someone must have done it. But what about 100? There must be no one left. Because the reward was too high. It was abnormally high. The building master turned around and left. Soon a bounty notice was sent out. After learning that killing one person would earn 100 spring of eternal life, some of the people who were tempted gave up. 100 divine level springs of eternal life? Was this divine level spring of eternal life a cabbage? No one believed this nonsense. In some unknown space, the left general suddenly appeared in front of Jingji. He whispered a few words in front of Jingji. After a while, Jingji shook his head and smiled. Interesting. The left general said in a deep voice, Saint Lord, do you want me to go myself? Jingji rolled his eyes at the left general. If you touch his family with his personality, won't he fight you to the death? The left general frowned. Then what should we do now? Jingji knew. This person's family and friends are his weakness. However, we can't be the first bird to stand out. We have to let the ancient demon clan go. Once the ancient demon clan does this, they will definitely anger this person. At that time both sides will fight to the death. The left general hesitated. Then he said, Saint Lord, don't you think you overestimated Yi Xian? Jingji looked at the left general. You still haven't changed your mind. The left general said, I admit that Yi Xian is extraordinary. However, no matter how extraordinary he is still from this low-level starfield. If he hadn't met Lord and Wujuan, I'm afraid he wouldn't even know what a divine body is. At this moment the left general suddenly appeared. The left general said in a deep voice, Saint Lord, rumor has it that Yi Xian is an outsider from outside the universe. Outsider? Jingji frowned. Who spread this? The left general shook his head. I don't know the exact source, but it is spreading. It is said that Yi Xian is from outside the universe. Nonsense. The left general suddenly said, how can Yi Xian be from outside the universe? This is utter nonsense. Jingji looked at the left general and smiled. Tell me, why can't he be from outside the universe? The left general said in a deep voice, that's impossible. Jingji asked again, why is it impossible? The left general said, Saint Lord, you don't really believe that he's from outside the universe, right? Jingji smiled. Why can't I believe it? The left general said in a deep voice, Yi Xian is so flashy. He must have spread this rumor to divert our attention. Jingji nodded. You're half right. The left general hurriedly asked, what about the other half? Jingji lay on the chair. She smiled and said, outside the universe. I'll say it again. We can't assume that others can't do what we can't. The left general smiled bitterly. Saint Lord, I know that you know he's lying. Right? Jingji slowly closed her eyes. I hope he's telling the truth. The left general were puzzled. Jingji said softly, I'm even more afraid that the person behind him has jumped out from this universe. Jumping out of this circle is much scarier than entering it. As she spoke, she slowly closed her eyes and pondered in her heart. A short while later, her expression gradually became solemn. Outsider? On the surface, Yi Xian was not an outsider. Because some of Yi Xian's actions, especially his understanding of martial arts, did not seem like an outsider at all. Moreover, Yi Xian loved to brag. He bragged every day. Since Yi Xian was not an outsider, there was only one possibility. The person behind Yi Xian had already jumped out of this universe. Even if he hadn't, his understanding of the Great Tao must have far surpassed this universe. Jingji's expression became even more solemn. The woman in the plain dress. The man in the green robe. These two people were still a mystery. Because not only could she not find them, she could not even find some basic information about them. They were too mysterious. And after Yi Xian's enemies saw the woman in the plain dress and the man in the green robe, they were basically all dead. At this moment, the left general said again, Saint Lord, are you really worried about the man in the green robe and the woman in the plain dress? Jingji looked at the left general and said with a smile, yes. The left general said in a deep voice, Saint Lord, on the surface, these two people are indeed very strong, but they are certainly not strong enough to jump out of this universe. There are two reasons. First, to jump out of this universe, even God Emperor can't do it. No matter how strong they are, they can't be so strong that they surpass God Emperor by too much, right? Second, if they really jumped out of this universe, why did they leave Yi Xian here? Jingji shook his head and smiled. You, the left general said, what I said makes sense, right? Stupid. Jingji stared at the left general. Even now you still look down on the people of this universe. Why do you look down on them? Because you have a sense of superiority. It's like a person from a big city going to the countryside with a sense of superiority. And this sense of superiority will kill you one day. The left general was silent. Jingji said with a smile, I know you must be thinking, since the person behind him is so strong, why do we still have to be enemies with him, right? The left general nodded. Jingji asked, do we have to be enemies with him? The left general frowned, puzzled. What do you mean? Jingji blinked and said, isn't it the ancient demons who are his enemies? The left general was speechless. The right general glanced at Jingji and sighed in his heart. His Saint Lord was trying to kill the ancient demons and Yi Xian. In fact, he admired his Saint Lord. In terms of strength and talent, the Saint Lord was no match for An Wujuan. Not only was she weaker than An Wujuan, but she was also weaker than many people. But she was the most intelligent person in the entire Saint Hall. Even now, St. Hall's power was lower than that of the ancient demons and the very ones, but St. Hall was still able to survive. It was also able to survive among the two superpowers. Unfortunately, she was not on good terms with Wuxia. Otherwise, the St. Hall would have been stronger than the ancient demons and the very race. Right at this moment, Jingji suddenly walked towards the distance. The left general asked, "Saint Lord, what are you doing?" Jingji smiled and said, "You don't know anything about this, so I will do it myself." Then she disappeared into the distance. After Jingji left, the left general suddenly said, "Does the Saint Lord want to destroy the ancient demons?" The left general said softly, "Shouldn't they?" The left general was silent for a moment and said, "But I think Wuxia is a bigger threat." The left general said, Wuxia is a bigger threat to the Saint Lord, and the ancient demons are a bigger threat to the Saint Hall. She chose to deal with the ancient demons first, which means that the Saint Hall is more important to her. The left general sighed. Actually, Wuxia is not suitable to be the Saint Lord. However, she is also very powerful. The left general looked at the left general. Don't you understand? The Saint Lord fought for the throne because she wanted to vent her anger. She is the daughter of the old Saint Lord, but the old Saint Lord said she was not as good as Wuxia. He shook his head and sighed. The old Saint Lord is also. The sacred sky's internal strife could not be blamed on Jingji. The left general suddenly said, "Can Wuxia and the Saint Lord reconcile?" The left general was speechless. "Do you think this is a game?" He turned and left. After Jingji left the hall, she began to shuttle through time and space. Soon she arrived at a small city. Azure Province. Jingji slowly walked to the front of an imperial palace hall. As soon as she arrived in front of the hall, a group of imperial guards blocked her way. At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded behind her. "Let Senior in." The group of guards made way and Tuoba Yen appeared in front of everyone. Jingji looked at Tuoba Yen and smiled without saying a word. Tuoba Yen smiled and said, "I am his woman. Senior, are you going to use me to threaten him?" Jingji smiled. "What if I say yes?" The corners of Tuoba Yen's mouth curled up. "I'm afraid you won't succeed." As she spoke, her soul began to burn. Suicide. Peace. I'm too ashamed to ask for a vote. Ask for a tip. Thank you. Chapter 1832. She didn't hesitate to commit suicide. Because Tuoba Yen knew that since she could find this place, it meant that her strength wasn't something she could resist. Only death awaited her. Because if she didn't die, Xian would be threatened by her and she might be humiliated as well. Nearby, a trace of surprise flashed through Jingji's eyes. What a fierce woman. As she spoke, she pressed down lightly with her right hand. Boom. Tuoba Yan's body returned to normal. Tuoba Yan's face sank. Jingji smiled. Ask your men to leave. Tuoba Yan glanced at Jingji and waved her right hand lightly. The soldiers around her retreated. Jingji smiled. Your man is here. As soon as she finished speaking, Xian appeared beside Tuoba Yan. Without a word, Xian drew his sword and slashed. In the distance, Jingji suddenly drew his sword as well. Boom. A wave of sword light suddenly erupted. Tuoba Yan's expression changed drastically. This aftershock was enough to destroy an entire kingdom. At this moment, Xian suddenly unleashed his sword domain. Boom. That remnant might was directly suppressed by him. Xian looked at Jingji in the distance with seemingly tangible killing intent in his eyes. Jingji smiled. You seem to have gotten stronger. Xian asked, shall we go somewhere else? Jingji hurriedly shook his head. No. Xian narrowed his eyes slightly, and his left thumb pressed against the hilt of his sword. The corners of Jingji's mouth curled up. If you make a move, this small place will be gone. Xian fell silent. If they were to make a move here, the entire Azure province would be gone. Jingji was about to speak when Xian suddenly smiled and said, Miss Jingji, you're a guest. Shall we talk inside? Jingji glanced at Xian and said with a smile, all right. After the three of them entered a large hall, Xian and Jingji sat opposite each other, and Tuoba Yen personally poured tea for them. Xian smiled and said, Miss Jingji, tell me the purpose of your visit. I just want to know more about you. Jingji said with a smile. Xian picked up the teacup and took a light sip, and then he said, young miss wants to understand my father and Qing. Jingji nodded. Yes. Would young master Yi like to talk about it? Yi Xian looked straight at Jingji. My father is invincible. Yi is invincible. Jingji's right fingers trembled slightly. She and Yi Xian looked at each other. What level of invincibility? Invincible in a small world or invincible in a great world or? Yi Xian suddenly said, always invincible. Invincible all the way. Jingji smirked. Really? Yi Xian nodded. I rarely lie. Jingji shook his head and smiled. As far as I know, your favorite thing to do is to fool others. However. With that, she looked at Yi Xian and said, I believe you. Yi Xian stared at Jingji and asked, do you really believe me? Jingji nodded. Yes. Yi Xian pondered for a moment and said, you want to use me to fight the ancient demon clan, and then your Saint Cathedral will reap the benefits. Jingji nodded. Yes. Yi Xian asked, are the ancient demon clan that stupid? Jingji smiled. They are not stupid, but they have to kill you just like I have to kill you. Yi Xian was silent for a moment and said, because of Shaoan. Jingji nodded. Besides her, there is another reason. It is because of the divine item you have. With that small pagoda dominating the entire universe is just around the corner. Yi Xian was about to speak, but Xiao Ta suddenly said excitedly, damn young master, am I so popular now? Yi Xian, small tower continued to say, little lord, I feel that my status should be raised. What do you think? Yi Xian said calmly, how about we join hands to kill dad and you become the master? Xiao Ta thought for a moment and said, our strength is still a little bit lower than masters. Yi Xian shook his head. Damn. This Xiao Ta is getting arrogant. At this time Jingji smiled and said, young master Yi, I heard that you have a very powerful sword. Can I have a look? Yi Xian said with a smile, what will I get? Jingji blinked. What do you want? Yi Xian asked, what can you give me? Jingji thought for a moment and said, I can give you some information about the ancient demon clan. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. They are your allies. Jingji smiled. Apart from myself, there is nothing I can't sell. Yi Xian gave him a thumbs up. Awesome. Jingji took a sip of tea and said, can I have a look? Because I'm a swordsman and I'm very interested in swords. Do you understand? Yi Xian opened his palm and the green profound sword appeared in his hand. He passed it to Jingji. The moment he received the green profound sword, Jingji's expression instantly became solemn. What a terrifying sword. That was her first thought. After a while, Jingji returned the sword to Yi Xian. Yi Xian took the sword and said with a smile, I thought you were going to rob me. Jingji shook his head. Since you dared to give it to me, then it proves that you are not afraid of me robbing you. There is no need to do such a stupid thing. Yi Xian smiled and did not say anything. Jingji was silent for a moment and said, do you know what's the most terrifying thing about this sword? Yi Xian shook his head. I don't know. Jingji knew. It's the space-time Tao contained in it. Although the space-time Tao did not surpass the current universe, the person who used it must have an attainment in space-time that surpasses the current universe. Only in this way could the person condense the space-time Tao of the current universe into this sword. Besides that, there are some strange things about this sword that even I can't understand. As she said that, she looked at Yi Xian. Are you selling this sword? The corner of Yi Xian's mouth twitched. What do you think? Jingji shook her head and smiled. It seems that you are not willing to sell it. Yi Xian said, Miss Jingji, I don't really want to be enemies with you. Jingji knew. Then don't help in Wujuan. If you don't help her, I can promise you that I will never be enemies with you. This is the truth. Yi Xian said with a smile, can you be friends with Ms. and instead of enemies? Jingji knew. Yes. As she said that, she paused for a moment and said, unless one of us disappears. Yi Xian shook his head and sighed. What grudge? Jingji smiled. Are you willing to give up Shaoan? Yi Xian shook his head. No. Even if I give up Shaoan, you won't let me go. Because Xiao Ta is very tempting, isn't it? Jingji thought for a moment and then said, that's right. Yi Xian smiled. Miss Jingji, tell me about the ancient demon clan. Jingji took out a scroll and handed it to Yi Xian. This is the information about the ancient demon clan. I've already written down the names of the super experts as well as those who pose a threat to you. Yi Xian glanced at it and then frowned. There are so many threats to me. Jingji asked with a smile. Do you think you are very strong? Yi Xian. Jingji picked up the teacup and drained it in one gulp, and then he said, don't look down on the ancient devil clan. Because the people behind you might have the qualifications to disregard them, but you don't. As she spoke, she stood up to leave. When she reached the door, she suddenly turned to look at Yi Xian. Your woman is not bad. Cherish her. After saying that, she disappeared. In the hall, Tuoba Yen grabbed Yi Xian's hand and softly said, I've dragged you down. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. What nonsense are you talking about? Saying this, he tightened his grip. He held Tuoba Yan's hand tightly and said softly, don't do something so foolish in the future. Do you understand? Tuoba Yan was silent. Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. This time he had some lingering fear. If Jingji really captured Tuoba Yan and held him hostage, Tuoba Yan suddenly said, I'll join Xiao Ta. Yi Xian smiled and said, no need. Tuoba Yan was puzzled. Why? Yi Xian said softly, because even if you go in, they'll use Azure Province to threaten me. I can't put the entire Azure Province in there, can I? Tuoba Yan frowned. Yi Xian said, I have to take the initiative to attack. Tuoba Yan looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled and said, in the past I was always passive and waiting for others to hit me. That's why I fought back. But now. As he spoke, he looked at Tuoba Yan. I want to take the initiative to attack and kill all threats. Tuoba Yan said softly, I support you. Yi Xian hugged Tuoba Yan, turned around and disappeared. Tuoba Yan looked at the horizon with a trace of worry in his eyes. After leaving Azure Province, Yi Xian returned to the Sword Alliance. At this moment, Sword Ju and the others had reached the spacetime realm. Yi Xian gathered Sword Ju, Sword Fanatic, and the other swordsmen, then sent all of them to Xiao Ta and had Xiaoan guide them. Although he didn't have enough god force to help Sword Ju and the others reach the divine physique realm, he wanted to nurture them to the ancient god realm so that they could build a solid foundation and then cultivate their divine physiques. With Sword Ju and the others' talent, as long as they had enough cultivation resources, it wouldn't be difficult for them to reach the ancient god realm. After all, Sword Ju and the others all had the sword Dao mark left in their bodies by his father. The higher their cultivation, the more layers of the sword Dao mark, and the more benefits they could obtain from his father. How could the things his father left them be ordinary? Definitely not. With enough cultivation resources, Sword Ju and the others would become super experts in the future. After arranging everything, Yi Xian left Xiao Ta and went to the house. As soon as he arrived, the house owner came out to welcome him. Yi Xian looked at the house owner. How many people do you have? The house owner answered solemnly, more than 100,000. Hearing this, Yi Xian's eyelids twitched. More than 100,000? The house owner nodded. Yi Xian thought for a moment, then opened his palm and a scroll appeared in front of the house owner. This is the method to cultivate a divine physique. You can cultivate it first, and in the future I will help you search for God Force to help you achieve a divine physique. The house owner blanked for a second, then quickly bowed deeply, his voice trembling. Thank you, young Master Yi. Yi Xian said, have all your subordinates temporarily put down their work and serve only me, is that all right? The house owner quickly answered, of course. Yi Xian said in a low voice, 2 things. First, send someone to follow my family and friends in secret. Send someone to follow every friend and family member. Don't disturb them. If anyone tries to harm them, just inform me immediately. The house owner nodded, all right. Yi Xian said, some people will enter this cosmos soon, and I need to know immediately when they arrive. The house owner said, the Templar and the legendary ancient demon clan? Yi Xian glanced at the house owner. You know a lot. The house owner smiled embarrassedly. That's what I do for a living. Besides the woman in a plain dress and the man in a green shirt behind you, I can more or less find out about the others. Yi Xian nodded. Inform me once they arrive. Also keep a close watch on the Templar. Inform me immediately if they do anything. The house owner quickly said, all right. Yi Xian turned around and left. At this moment, the sword ruins in his hand had become the green profound sword. Chapter 1833. Take the initiative to attack. Jingji's visit to Tuoba Yan made him realize that he couldn't passively wait for these people to come to him. He had to take the initiative to attack and kill all threats in the cradle. In the Xiao Ta, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground. His current realm had stabilized and his current divine body was different from others. Because he had a sword body and a divine body. However, he found that there was still a gap between him and Jingji. Of course, he wasn't as powerless as he was in the past. Moreover, if he used the Azure Profound Sword, he still had a chance to kill Jingji. At this moment, Xiaoan appeared in front of Yi Xian and looked at Yi Xian. Be careful of Jingji. Yi Xian nodded. This woman wasn't simple. She was very calculative. Yi Xian seemed to have thought of something and hurriedly asked, Xiaoan, are your former subordinates still around? Xiaoan shook her head. They've all been killed. Yi Xian was speechless. Needless to say, Xiaoan was definitely the kind of person who only liked to cultivate. Xiaoan glanced at Yi Xian and said softly, I've dragged you into this. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. Don't be so polite. Moreover, they're not just targeting you now. They also want my Xiaota. Xiaoan said, in the end it's because of me. Yi Xian smiled. Now is not the time to discuss this. Xiaoan nodded. Okay. Yi Xian said, in the ancient demon clan, the strongest is the ancient demon clan's patriarch, right? Xiaoan said, yes. He and I were both experts at the peak of the divine soul realm, but now he should be much stronger than before. Yi Xian asked, surpassing the divine soul realm? Xiaoan shook her head slightly. I don't know. Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, don't worry about it. Xiaoan, they should be here in a few days. During this period, cultivate well and leave the outside matters to me. Xiaoan nodded. Okay. With that, she turned around and left. Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. A moment later, he got up and left. Somewhere in the unknown starry sky, Jingji was sitting on a chair. She was holding an ancient book and reading it attentively. At this time, the left general suddenly appeared in front of Jingji and was about to speak when Jingji stretched out a finger and waved it. The left general bowed slightly and retreated to the side. After reading for about half an hour, Jingji closed the ancient book and said with a smile, this book is quite interesting. With that, she glanced at Zhujiang. You can have a look. Zhujiang shook his head. I'm not interested in books. Jingji smiled and said, did Yi Xian make a move? The left general nodded. He sent someone to spy on us. Moreover, he seemed to be leading a group of experts from a force called the Sword Alliance. I don't know where those experts are now. What else? Jingji asked with a smile. The left general spoke in a low voice. This fellow seems to be plotting something recently. We have to be careful. Jingji nodded. Got it. As she spoke, she picked up the ancient book in her hand and continued reading. The left general spoke in a low voice. Holy Lord, aren't you worried? Jingji smiled. Worried about what? The left general was about to speak when the left general suddenly said, the Holy Lord knows what to do. Don't worry about it. The left general smiled bitterly and didn't say anything else. Jingji was about to speak when she suddenly raised her head. In the next moment she frowned. So soon. As soon as she finished speaking, the space in the depths of the starry sky suddenly split open, and then a group of experts in black robes walked out. The ancient devil clan. The leader was an old man with a face full of wrinkles. The old man looked at Jingji in the distance. In the next moment he appeared in front of Jingji and nodded slightly. Holy Lord Jingji. Jingji smiled. Where's your patriarch? The old man replied, he'll arrive in a day. Yi Xian blinked. Why a day later? The old man replied, there are many things in the clan that need to be explained. Jingji nodded. That's true. The old man spoke in a low voice. Holy Lord, where's that fellow Yi Xian right now? The corners of Jingji's mouth curled up slightly. She'd asked about Yi Xian first and not in Wujuan. This meant that the main objective of this trip was the small pagoda. That was exactly what she wanted. Jingji thought for a moment and said, Elder Guqi, Yi Xian isn't simple at all. Why don't we wait for your patriarch to arrive before we go look for him? Guqi shook his head. There's no need for that. Jingji spoke seriously. That fellow Yi Xian is quite strong. Guqi spoke in a low voice. Holy Lord, can you help us keep in Wujuan busy during the battle? Jingji hurriedly replied, of course. However, that fellow Yi Xian is quite capable. Are you really not going to wait for your patriarch to arrive before looking for him? Or perhaps you can help me keep in Wujuan busy while I deal with Yi Xian. Guqi immediately shook his head. There's no need. Mr. Wujuan, just help us stall Mr. Wujuan. Leave Yi Xian to us. Jingji intended to say something else, but Guqi hurriedly said, "It's decided. We'll go look for that fellow Yi Xian right now." Jingji glanced at the right general, and the right general understood his intentions and hurriedly said, "Elder Guqi, I'll lead you there." Guqi nodded, "Thank you." The right general said, "Everyone come with me." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. Guqi hurriedly led the other experts of the ancient devil clan along as well. The corners of Jingji's mouth curled up slightly. "I like idiots like him." As she spoke, she followed along as well. The group of people shuttled through the starry sky. On the way, Jingji's voice suddenly rang out in the minds of the left general and the right general. "Be careful. Yi Xian is about to appear." Both of them were stunned when they heard this. Suddenly, a strand of light suddenly lit up. The others hadn't even recovered from their shock when the head of one of the experts from the ancient devil clan flew into the air. At the instant that the head flew into the air, another ray of sword energy lit up. The heads of two experts from the ancient devil clan instantly flew into the air. At this moment, Guqi's expression changed drastically. "Who launched a surprise attack against us?" As he spoke, he took a step forward, and then a formidable barrier appeared in the surroundings. Bang! At this moment, the starry sky in the surroundings seethed. Besides them, Jingji and the others, there was no one else here. Jingji glanced at the right and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. She naturally knew who it was that attacked. Who else could it be besides Yi Xian? Guqi glanced at the surroundings and his eyes were filled with icy coldness. "Yi Xian, do you not dare to show yourself?" There was no reply. Guqi suddenly turned to look at Jingji. "Hallowed Lord, can you sense Yi Xian?" Jingji slowly closed his eyes, and then his divine sense instantly enveloped this expanse of the starry sky. A short while later, Jingji opened his eyes and shook his head. "I can't." Guqi's face fell completely when he heard this. Even the Hallowed Lord can't sense him? Suddenly, a shadow appeared in front of him, and then a ray of light slashed down in a straight line. "Draw the sword to decide life and death." Not only did it decide life and death, it was even the green profound sword. This sudden attack caused Guqi's expression to change drastically, and he swiftly moved his right arm forward. "Take it head-on." The physical body of an ancient devil clan member was no joke. The main reason the ancient devil clan was so strong was because their bodies were much stronger than ordinary humans, and even some demon beasts couldn't compare to them. But he hadn't expected that the sword in Yi Xian's hand wasn't an ordinary sword as well. The sword descended. Everyone watched as Guqi's right arm and body were slashed into two. His body instantly shattered and only his soul remained. However, at the instant that Yi Xian's sword descended, Guqi's soul was absorbed by the green profound sword. After that, Yi Xian issued a command in his heart, and the green profound sword flew out. The head of an ancient devil clan expert on his right instantly flew into the air, and then another ray of light appeared over 1 kilometer away. In the blink of an eye, the experts of the ancient devil clan fell one after another. However, when Yi Xian's green profound sword was about to kill the last expert from the ancient devil clan, a powerful force suddenly locked onto the green profound sword. Jingji had attacked. Yi Xian gazed at Jingji. Jingji grinned and was about to speak when Yi Xian suddenly said, why did you stop me?" Everyone in the surroundings was stunned when they heard this. Even the expert from the ancient devil clan gazed at Jingji with disbelief. Yi Xian blinked. He can't be allowed to live. The two of us." Meanwhile, Jingji suddenly waved his right hand. Bang! The powerhouse of the ancient demon clan had been completely wiped out. Jingji turned to look at Yi Xian and smiled. "Are you trying to drive a wedge between me and the ancient devil clan?" Yi Xian smiled. "Do you still need me to drive a wedge between you and the ancient devil clan? Both of you are scheming against each other anyway." Jingji smiled. "I have to say, I have underestimated you and your sword." In fact, she was also extremely shocked at this moment. One must know that Guqi was a genuine divine core realm expert. An expert of this level was actually instantly killed by Yi Xian with a single strike of his sword. Not even his soul and consciousness remained. It was a little scary. Yi Xian opened his palm and the green profound sword began to absorb the souls of the experts from the ancient devil clan. He looked at Jingji. The next time the experts from the ancient devil clan come, remember to inform me immediately. Jingji looked at the corpses on the ground and did not speak. Xian suddenly said, the experts from the ancient devil clan were all killed, but none of your people died. Do you think the ancient devil clan patriarch will be suspicious? As he spoke, he glanced at the left and right generals. Both of their expressions changed. Damn it, this guy wants their divine master to kill me. Jingji smiled but did not say anything. Xian laughed and turned to leave. After a few steps he stopped and said, Miss Jingji, do you mind if I call you Jinger? Jingji smiled, I mind. Xian smiled, it's okay, I don't mind. He turned to leave, but at this time the starry sky in front of him suddenly boiled. At this moment Jingji suddenly drew his sword. He attacked. However, the target was not Xian but the left general and right general. Before they could react, their bodies were cut into pieces. At this time, a shadow suddenly appeared above Xian's head. The ancient devil clan patriarch. The chieftain of the ancient demon clan took a look at the battlefield and then at Jingji and the two generals next to her. In the end he looked at Xian. When he was about to speak, Xian suddenly drew out his sword and slashed. Boom! The shadow instantly shattered. Xian sheathed his sword and walked away. Miss Jingji, I, Xian, am not afraid of fighting and I am not afraid of scheming. If you want to play, no matter if you're wearing clothes or not, I can afford to play with you. With that, he disappeared into the distance. Chapter 1834. Shameless. After Xian left, the left general couldn't help but say fiercely, Holy Lord, he's humiliating you. Then help me kill him. Jingji said with a smile. The left general was speechless. How could he possibly defeat the current Xian? Only experts at Jingji's level could deal with the current Xian. Moreover, it had to be his true body. After all, the demon lord's image had been instantly killed by Xian with a single slash. The speed at which Xian's strength grew was too terrifying. Jingji suddenly said softly, I want to see that woman in a plain dress. The left and right general looked at Jingji and Jingji smiled, he's too arrogant. I want to see the person behind him. I want to see exactly how strong that woman is. The left general shook his head, I can't find her. Jingji said softly, I'll find her myself. With that she turned around and left. The left general suddenly turned to look at the right general. Holy Lord, why did you destroy our bodies? The right general said, if she didn't destroy our bodies, how would she explain it to the ancient devil clan's patriarch? As he spoke, he turned to look at the horizon, that Xian is too cunning. Fan Duo withdrew her gaze from somewhere high up in the clouds. She was the law of this universe, and it was very difficult for anything that happened in this universe to satisfy her. Moreover, she'd always been paying attention to Xian. She'd seen how Xian killed those people. At this moment she was extremely shocked. She hadn't expected that Xian's strength was actually to such an extent. Especially Xian's green profound sword. She'd watched the woman in a plain dress forge this sword, and now she realized that the sword was much more complicated than she'd imagined. It was a sword that would never go out of style, because it was forged by someone who far surpassed this universe. Right at this moment, a woman suddenly walked over from afar and it was Tao Yi. Seeing Tao Yi, Fan Duo frowned. Tao Yi said, I want to see that woman. The woman in a plain dress. She also knew about Xian's murder. Just like Fan Duo, she was incomparably shocked. Xian's strength had actually reached such a level. Especially the sword in Xian's hand, it was too terrifying. Fan Duo shook her head, I don't know where she is. Ming Yi frowned slightly. You don't know? Fan Duo chuckled and said, she should have left this universe by now. Hearing this, Fan Duo's expression turned solemn. Can she really jump out of this current universe? Fan Duo nodded, yes. There was silence again. Fan Duo looked at Dingy. You're not targeting Xian anymore? Do I look like an idiot to you? Tao Yi asked calmly. Fan Duo smiled. Actually, I really wanted to kill you before I met her. But after meeting her, I suddenly realized that life has a lot more meaning. For example, jumping out of this universe. Jump out of this universe. Was it difficult? Of course it was difficult. Not to mention the two of them, even their Grandmaster couldn't do it. Even if he surpassed the God Emperor realm, he still couldn't jump out. Dingyi suddenly said, "Can I ask her for guidance?" Fan Duo smiled. "I've met her before. She's a very, very strange person. She doesn't even want to say a word to others. Except for Xian." Dingyi frowned. "Is she really Xian's sister?" Fan Duo nodded. "Yes. She only recognizes Xian. Except for Xian, she recognizes no one else. Moreover, she only answers when Xian asks questions." Dingyi hurriedly said, "Then let's borrow Xian's mouth to help us ask." After saying this, she regretted it. Why would Xian help her ask? Dingyi said again, "How about we help him fight?" Fan Duo smiled. "Dingyi, you wanted to kill him before." Dingyi spoke indifferently, "That's something the god's graveyard does." Fan Duo shook her head. "Did you learn how to be so shameless from him?" Dingyi spoke seriously. "Fan Duo, we can put aside the enmity between us for now. We have to look for Xian and ask him to help us ask that woman in a plain dress." Fan Duo fell silent for a short while before she said, "You're willing to help him?" Dingyi frowned slightly. "Why not? That woman is so strong. Can the ancient devil clan and hallowed halls defeat her? This is a situation that we can surely win." Fan Duo was speechless. "I noticed that today is the first time I've gotten to know you." Dingyi spoke indifferently. "One has to be flexible. It's the same for gods." Fan Duo shook her head and said, "If we really help him fight, then it shouldn't be a problem to ask him to help us ask that woman in a plain dress." Dingyi immediately said, "Then we'll help him fight. Doesn't he need help right now?" As soon as she finished speaking, she turned around and left. Fan Duo was speechless as she watched Dingyi vanish into the distance. A short while later, she vanished as well. Within the shao, Xian gazed at the green profound sword in his grasp. At this moment, the sword's aura was deep like an ocean, and even he was unable to sense its depths. The green profound sword. The strength of this sword was even more terrifying than a godhood realm expert. Most importantly, this sword could only be used by him alone. At this moment, Xian suddenly raised his head. The next moment, he directly left the small tower. Xian saw Dingyi and Fan Duo outside the Xiaota, and his expression instantly changed. He held the green profound sword in his left hand and was about to attack instinctively. Meanwhile, Dingyi suddenly said, "Wait." Xian frowned slightly. "What are we waiting for?" Dingyi gazed at Xian. "Do you know how strong the ancient devil clan is?" Xian smiled. "I know more about Dao Yi." Dingyi said, "We'll help you fight." Xian was quite puzzled. "Help me fight? Are you kidding me?" Dingyi was a bit dissatisfied. "Do we look like we're joking with you?" Xian turned to look at Fan Duo and she said, "We're indeed here to help you fight." Xian smiled. "Supreme Fan Duo, I believe you. But..." Then he turned to Dingyi. "What about you? You wanted to kill me before. Why do you suddenly want to help me fight?" Dingyi said, "Let's make a deal." Xian was a bit curious. "What deal?" Dingyi said, "We'll help you fight and you'll help us ask the plain-dressed woman how to jump out of this universe." Hearing this, Xian understood. Damn it. Our main target is Qing. A plan suddenly emerged in Xian's mind. At this moment, Dingyi suddenly said, "Is there a problem?" Xian looked at Dingyi and said with a smile, "Supreme Dingyi, it's not easy to jump out of this universe." Dingyi stared at Xian. "I know it's not easy. If you have other requests, you can tell me." Xian was silent. Dingyi frowned slightly. "I heard you're very lecherous. Don't tell me you have those thoughts about us." Hearing this, Fan Duo couldn't help glancing at Xian. Xian immediately said, "Slander. This is slander. Who said I Xian am lecherous?" Dingyi said indifferently, "As far as I know, after you returned to that Qing province, you were able to stay in a room with a woman for more than 10 days. I'm not slandering you, am I?" Xian's expression froze. Dingyi said again, "Be more direct, state your conditions." Xian said seriously, "I don't have any other conditions. What I mean is, how many other Supremes do you know?" Dingyi frowned slightly. "You want other Supremes to help you?" Xian nodded. "The condition is that I will ask Qing to teach them how to jump out of this universe. Of course, I can't guarantee that Qing can help you jump out of this universe. After all, it depends on the individual." Dingyi was silent. Fan Duo suddenly asked, "Of course we know this. As long as she is willing to teach us a thing or two, it's enough for us." Yi Xian nodded. That's not a problem. Fan Duo said, I can't guarantee whether the other two supremes are willing to help, but I will inform them. Yi Xian said with a smile, all right. Fan Duo nodded, turned around and left. Yi Xian suddenly said, Supremacy Fan Duo, there is one more thing. Fan Duo looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, you are the law of this universe, so you are very familiar with it, right? Fan Duo nodded, yes. Yi Xian said, I want you to help me monitor this universe. If anyone comes in, immediately inform me. Fan Duo nodded, no problem. Yi Xian said softly, thank you. Fan Duo nodded, turned around and left. Yi Xian looked at Dingy. Supremacy Dingy, I have to tell you that the ancient demon clan is not ordinary. Dingy said, no. Your sister is invincible anyway. Isn't that right? Yi Xian was speechless. Dingy said again, can you show me your sword? Yi Xian said with a smile, of course. Saying this, he opened his palm and the azure profound sword flew to Dingy. Dingy looked at it for a moment and her expression gradually became solemn. No wonder Fan Duo is so afraid. She was shocked at this moment. What kind of level was needed to create such a terrifying sword? That woman could not only take the power of time from the main time vein of the universe, but also suppress it. This meant that with her strength she was completely capable of destroying this current universe. Once the main time vein river was destroyed, this universe would basically be finished. Deng Yi returned the azure profound sword to Yi Xian and then said, your sister is really powerful. Saying this, she glanced at Yi Xian, but why are you so weak? Yi Xian, Deng Yi shook her head and sighed, there really is always someone better in this world. I will go back and calm down first, I will appear when you are in trouble. Saying this, she turned around and disappeared at the end of the horizon. Yi Xian put away the azure profound sword, turned around and left. Nightmare Starfield, Lingwu City. At this moment Lingwu City had completely vanished. Jingji looked down from the starry sky, and she was silent for a very long time as she gazed at the space that had been erased. It didn't take long for her to arrive at the peak of a mountain. The place where the woman in a plain dress had appeared in the past. Jingji slowly closed her eyes, and the space around her started to seethe. She was looking for the woman in a plain dress. She wanted to see if that woman was as powerful as she guessed. If she was just a little bit stronger, then she would immediately turn around and skin Yi Xian alive. This man is too arrogant. Gradually, a series of images appeared in the surroundings. Time was reversed. Just at this moment, time returned to the past. Not too far away, the woman in a plain dress was playing chess with a white-haired old man. This was time that had already passed, but it had appeared once again thanks to Jingji's powerful divine ability. At this moment, the woman in a plain dress suddenly turned around and glanced at Jingji. Jingji's pupils constricted, and she seemed as if she had seen a ghost as she spoke in a trembling voice. My dear mother. How could you possibly see me? P.S. Give me a ticket. I want any ticket. Asking for tickets. For the sake of living, I can only shamelessly ask for tickets over and over again every day. It's all for the sake of living. Chapter 1835. At this moment Jingji was stunned. She was going back in time now. Under such circumstances, it was impossible for the plain-dressed woman to discover her, because this was something that had already happened. No one could change what had already happened. Reversing time and space. Reversing history? That was simply impossible. However, the woman in front of her had really discovered her. What the hell was going on? At this moment, Jingji's mind was blank. At this moment, the white-haired old man in front of the plain-dressed woman suddenly said, What are you looking at? The plain-dressed woman retracted her gaze and said indifferently, I'm looking at a dead person. As soon as her voice fell, she opened her palm and the white chess piece in her hand suddenly flew out. Jingji's pupils suddenly constricted. At this moment she smelled the scent of death. Invincible. That was the only thought in her mind. At this critical moment, Jingji suddenly had an idea and shouted, I'm Yi Xian's friend. The chess piece stopped between Jingji's eyebrows. Jingji heaved a sigh of relief in her heart. My gamble paid off. This woman in front of me cared a lot about Yi Xian. The plain-dressed woman looked at Jingji. My brother's friend? Jingji hurriedly nodded, yes. The plain-dressed woman shook her head. You're not. Jingji did not explain and bowed slightly. Thank you, senior, for sparing my life. The plain-dressed woman said, Do you know why I didn't kill you? Jingji glanced at the plain-dressed woman. Because of young Master Yi. The plain-dressed woman shook her head. Because you're weak and can become his whetstone. Jingji. In front of the plain-dressed woman, the white-haired old man said in a deep voice, What did you see? The plain-dressed woman glanced at the white-haired old man. I can't see because you're weak. Since you're weak, then don't ask because I have no obligation to explain so much to you. Understand? The white-haired old man was stunned, then he stared at the plain-dressed woman and smiled insincerely. In hundreds of thousands of years, this is the first time someone said I'm weak. The plain-dressed woman's fingertips suddenly flashed with a sword light, and in the blink of an eye, bang. Without any warning, a sword light pierced between the white-haired old man's eyebrows. In an instant, this sword light forcefully locked onto the old man. The white-haired old man was directly stunned. Beside him, Jingji was also dumbfounded. This white-haired old man was a peak Divine Soul Realm powerhouse. He was even half a step into the Divine Soul Realm. However, this kind of expert didn't even have the strength to fight back in front of this plainly dressed woman. Just how strong was this woman? At this moment, Jingji and the white-haired old man were extremely shocked. Right at this moment, the white-haired old man suddenly said in a trembling voice, Senior is right, I'm weak. I'm very weak. The woman in the plain dress waved her jade-like hand lightly, and the sword light between the white-haired old man's eyebrows disappeared. The white-haired old man's body returned to normal. At this moment, his forehead was already dripping with cold sweat. He glanced at the woman in the plain dress and his eyes were filled with fear. The woman picked up a chess piece and placed it down and then she said, Do you know why I didn't kill you? The white-haired old man hurriedly said, Because I'm weak. The plainly dressed woman glanced at the white-haired old man. Do you have any objections? The white-haired elder hurriedly shook his head. I'm convinced. I'm convinced. The woman in the plain dress suddenly turned to look at Jingji. Is there anything else? Jingji spoke in a low voice. Why are you able to see me? The woman withdrew her gaze and said, Let's not discuss such a low-level question. Jingji was speechless. The woman in the plain dress? The white-haired old man couldn't help but glance at the spot where the woman's gaze had descended. However, there was nothing there. The white-haired old man couldn't help but frown. What exactly is there? As if he'd thought of something, the white-haired old man's pupils suddenly constricted. Someone is reversing the flow of time. The woman glanced at the white-haired old man. How many years have you cultivated for? The white-haired old man hesitated for a moment before he said, I've cultivated for 1,000,000 years. The woman shook her head. How weak. You're much weaker than my older brother. The white-haired old man was speechless. Jingji suddenly said, He doesn't seem to be very strong. Jingji's voice had just resounded when a ray of sword light suddenly shot into the center of her forehead. Bang. In an instant, Jingji's body shattered into pieces and only his soul remained. Moreover, his soul was completely locked down by that strand of sword light. Jingji was stunned. What did I say? Why did she suddenly attack? The woman glanced at Jingji. Are you doubting my older brother? Jingji's expression was quite unsightly. Damn it. Just because he said that the bastard wasn't particularly strong, this woman almost killed him. Is there any justice in this world? Is there any law? The white-haired old man broke out in cold sweat. At this moment, even his hands were trembling. Someone was reversing the flow of time. Reversing the flow of time wasn't very terrifying because he could do it as well. The terrifying part was that this woman could see someone who could reverse the flow of time. That was King ridiculous. This had exceeded his understanding. Is this something that a human can accomplish? Even he felt that it was quite absurd. Such a thing was utterly impossible. However, at this moment he was able to sense that something was off in this expanse of space, and someone really was reversing the flow of time. The white-haired old man was slightly dazed. Who exactly did I encounter? Jingji spoke abruptly. Senior, I know him and I have no ill intent towards him. The woman glanced at Jingji. If you have no ill intent, then why did you come looking for me? Jingji was speechless. The woman got up and walked in front of Jingji. She looked at him. Do you want to see how strong I am? Jingji nodded subconsciously. After nodding, she was a little confused. What's wrong with me? The woman stared at Jingji. Did you see that? Jingji said in a deep voice, you are much stronger than I imagined. The woman shook her head. She turned around and walked in front of the white-haired old man, sat down and picked up a chess piece. As soon as this chess piece was played, the white-haired old man immediately frowned. Jingji suddenly asked, you've stepped out of this existing universe, right? The woman didn't answer and directly ignored him. Jingji was unwilling to give up and asked again, how did you do it? The plain-dressed woman glanced at Jingji. Would you explain to an ant how you managed to fly? Jingji's expression froze. At this moment, the white-haired old man suddenly couldn't help but ask, Senior, how can you see someone who can reverse the flow of time? The woman asked back, why should I answer you? The white-haired old man was speechless. The woman looked at the white-haired old man. If you ask such a low-level question again, I will shatter your divine soul. The white-haired old man quickly shook his head. Don't ask. I won't ask any more. The woman turned her head and glanced at Jingji. And you? Jingji smiled bitterly. She really wanted to ask because she really wanted to know how this woman in a plain dress saw her. However, she didn't dare to ask, because she knew that the woman in the plain dress was not joking with her. If she continued to ask, the woman in the plain dress would really kill her. This woman's strength was really too terrifying. After a moment of silence, Jingji opened her palm. She wanted to withdraw the time reversal, but she was shocked to find that she couldn't withdraw it at all. As if she thought of something, she quickly looked at the woman in the plain dress not far away, her eyes filled with horror. You can actually control the future time and space. This is impossible, this is simply impossible, this is absolutely impossible. At this moment she was already somewhat incoherent. She had to say that at this moment she was really afraid. The scene in front of her was unreal, like a dream. The woman in the plain dress didn't answer Jingji. Jingji continued, how exactly did you do it? Her voice even carried a trace of a pleading tone. If the woman in the plain dress was willing to tell her, then she could immediately surpass the divine soul realm and even surpass the current universe. But the prerequisite was that the woman in the plain dress was willing to tell her. But the woman in the plain dress refused to tell her. Actually, all of this wasn't precious to her because as far as she was concerned, it was very low. The reason why she didn't tell them was very simple. These two people weren't her brothers, so why should she tell them? Right at this moment, the woman said, leave. As soon as she finished speaking, she flicked her sleeve and the space here trembled. Meanwhile, Jingji started to become illusory. She was about to be forcefully sent away. In next to no time, Jingji vanished. The white-haired old man in front of the woman in the plain dress hesitated to speak. In the end, the white-haired old man didn't ask anything. It was mainly because he didn't dare to. This senior's temper wasn't just an ordinary kind of bad. He was afraid that once he asked, it would be the last time he would ask in this lifetime. Continue the game. Jingji returned to reality, and at this moment her physical body was gone. Jingji glanced at the battlefield and then she glanced at herself. At this moment only her soul remained. At this moment she finally realized that everything from before was real. That woman was actually able to traverse space to kill her. How exactly did she do that? Jingji was truly at a loss. Right at this moment, the left commander suddenly appeared in front of Jingji, and he was stunned when he saw that only her soul remained. Jingji's eyes were filled with bewilderment as if she hadn't noticed the left commander's arrival. The left commander spoke with a trembling voice, Divine Lord, your physical body. Jingji restrained her thoughts and looked at the left commander. Is something the matter? The left commander spoke in a low voice, Divine Lord, your physical body. Jingji spoke indifferently, the wind just now was too strong and my physical body was blown away. The left commander was dumbfounded. Strong wind? My physical body was blown away? What the hell? Jingji suddenly said, is something the matter? The left commander hesitated for a moment before he said, the patriarch of the ancient devil race, Gu Ming, is here. Jingji frowned slightly. He's here? The left commander nodded. He asked the Divine Lord to go and discuss how to kill Zhou Xian and the people behind Zhou Xian. Jingji was stunned, then said, kill Zhou Xian and the people behind him? The left commander said, yes. The woman in the plain dress and the man in the green robe. The woman in the plain dress. Jingji's body suddenly trembled. The left commander hurriedly asked, "Divine Lord, what's wrong?" Jingji said softly, "The wind is too strong and it's a little cold." The left commander. Chapter 1836. Strong wind. A little cold. The left general was confused. What happened to the Holy Lord? Jingji suddenly said, "Let's go." With that she turned and left. Her back was a little sad. Today was a big blow to her. She had never been looked down upon like this. The woman in the plain dress looked at her as if she was looking at an ant. How strong was that woman? It was a mystery. After a while Jingji arrived at her palace. At this moment her body had almost recovered. Although the woman in the plain dress had destroyed her body, her foundation was not hurt. Therefore she could recover her body. In front of the hall, a middle-aged man stood quietly. The middle-aged man was tall and wore a black robe. His whole body exuded an invisible pressure that gave people a strong sense of oppression. This person was the ancient demon clan leader, Gu Ming. Seeing Jingji, Gu Ming nodded slightly. "Miss Jingji." Jingji smiled. "Clan leader Gu Ming, long time no see." Gu Ming nodded. "Indeed." Jingji smiled. "Let's get down to business. What do you think of Yi Xian?" Gu Ming said, "He is quite mysterious." Jingji blinked. "This person is not simple." Gu Ming nodded. "He is indeed not simple." Jingji sat on the reclining chair and said, "Clan leader Gu Ming, do you want that xiaotao?" Gu Ming asked, "Miss Jingji, don't you want it?" Jingji smiled. "I want it. But there is only one xiaotao, isn't there?" After a moment of silence Gu Ming said, "Take it first, then we can discuss this matter. What do you think?" Jingji shook her head. "Clan leader Gu Ming, don't try to fool me. If we take it, the Saint Hall can't defeat the ancient demon clan." Gu Ming said, "Miss Jingji, you are too modest." Jingji shook her head and smiled. "I am not being modest. I know my limits." Gu Ming said, "Miss Jingji, do you have any ideas?" Jingji thought for a moment and said, "If we get it, we can share it. Of course, Xiaotao can stay with clan leader Gu Ming, but the Saint Hall can also use him. What do you think?" Gu Ming nodded, "Sure." Jingji smiled and said, "The ancient devil clan has Xiaotao, so the ancient devil clan has to put in more effort. Is that okay?" Gu Ming looked at Jingji. "What do you mean?" Jingji smiled and said, "The ancient devil clan will deal with Yi Xian and the people behind him. I will deal with Lord and Wujuan. Of course, if the ancient fate clan leader is willing to let the Saint Hall possess Xiaotao, the Saint Hall is willing to deal with Yi Xian and the people behind him." Gu Ming chuckled and said, "In Miss Jingji's opinion, Yi Xian and the people behind him are more difficult to deal with than Lord and Wujuan?" Jingji shook his head. "That's not it. It's mainly because Wujuan hasn't fully recovered his strength, so it's easier to deal with him. Of course, Yi Xian and the people behind him weren't simple as well. Especially that woman in a plain dress. I heard she's already attained the God Emperor realm, and her strength is extraordinary." "God Emperor?" Gu Ming frowned. "Are you sure?" Jingji shook his head. "I can't be sure, but according to my estimation, it's more or less the same." Gu Ming said, "Why haven't I heard of such an expert?" Jingji smiled and said, "Ancient Fate clan leader, this universe is very big. Isn't it normal to have a few super experts?" Gu Ming nodded. "That's true." Jingji smiled and said, "Do you want to deal with Yi Xian and the people behind him or Lord and Wujuan?" Gu Ming suddenly asked, "Have you seen that woman in a plain dress?" Jingji shook his head. "I've never seen her before. Her strength is also my guess. I don't know whether she's at the God Emperor realm or not. However, she shouldn't be weak, that's for sure." Gu Ming was silent. He naturally didn't believe Jingji, so he had already sent people to investigate the people behind Yi Xian. Jingji suddenly smiled and said, "Ancient Fate clan leader, we don't have much time. Because Yi Xian has Xiaotao, the speed at which his strength grows can be described as terrifying. Especially since he has Lord and Wujuan by his side." Gu Ming nodded and said with a smile, "No hurry. Just half a day." Jingji nodded. "Then I'll wait for news from Ancient Fate clan leader." After saying that, she turned and walked into the main hall. Gu Ming glanced at Jingji and frowned slightly. He was also a little afraid of this woman. Too sinister. He was also afraid that this woman would dig a hole for him. Therefore he needed to investigate Yi Xian himself. He also felt that Yi Xian and the people behind him were not simple. Otherwise, Jing Ji would have killed Yi Xian long ago and obtained Xiao Ta. About an hour later, an old man from the ancient demon clan suddenly appeared in front of Gu Ming. Gu Ming said, "Speak." The old man said in a deep voice, "Clan leader, there are two people behind Yi Xian. One is the man in green, the Sword Alliance's sword master, and his strength is unknown. The other is the woman in a plain dress. She claims to be Yi Xian's sister and her strength is unknown. However, according to my people's investigation, this woman basically only uses one sword to kill people. Moreover, she destroyed the Nightmare Star domain before. Our people estimate that this woman's strength should be at the God Emperor realm." He paused for a moment before continuing, "At least the God Emperor realm." Gu Ming looked at the old man. "At least?" The old man nodded. "Yes. The God Emperor realm." Gu Ming fell into deep thought. The old man continued, "As for Yi Xian's origin, although this universe is saying that he is an outsider, there is no basis for it because he was born in a small world. Of course, we can't rule out the possibility that he is a reincarnated person. This person is indeed a bit abnormal. He has cultivated the sword for less than 10 years, but his strength is already enough to instantly kill a divine spark realm expert." Gu Ming said, "How much have you investigated about the Xiao Ta and the sword in his hands?" The old man said in a deep voice, "This person indeed has a Xiao Ta and a sword in his hands. Both of them are divine objects, especially that Xiao Ta. It is said that 100 years inside is equivalent to a day outside. However, this subordinate thinks that this might be a bit exaggerated. But no matter what, this tower is definitely not simple because Yi Xian's growth in strength is really abnormal. But if it is because of this Xiao Ta, then it makes sense." Gu Ming suddenly said, "What about the woman in the plain dress? Was that Xiao Ta and the sword made by this woman?" The old man shook his head. "I don't know. Because there's truly too little information about this woman in a simple dress." Gu Ming was silent. The old man continued, "There are too many unanswered questions such as whether this Yi Xian is an outsider or not. And where did Yi Xian's Xiao Ta and sword come from?" He looked at Gu Ming. "Patriarch, no matter what, we have to be careful of this person." After a moment of silence, Gu Ming said, "Our ancient demon clan must get this tower. If we can get this tower, our ancient demon clan will be invincible in this universe. Not only that, we can also use this tower to reach a higher level." The old man said in a deep voice, "That's true, but we still have to be careful whether it is this Yi Xian or that Holy Lord Jingji." Gu Ming said, "Of course. Especially that woman, we have to be careful." She was also wary of Jingji. After a moment, Gu Ming said again, "Inform Elder Gu Qing and the others to come here immediately. Our ancient demon clan must get that Xiao Ta." The old man bowed slightly. "Understood." After saying that, he turned around and left. Gu Ming slowly closed his eyes. Xiao. This was the reason why he came in person. If Xiao Ta was really that heaven-defying, then once he got it, he would have a chance to jump out of this universe. After a moment, Gu Ming turned around and left. Yi Xian, who was cultivating in Xiao Ta's body, suddenly left Xiao Ta. As soon as he left Xiao Ta, the Supreme Law Fan duo appeared in front of him. Yi Xian said, "He's here." The Supreme Law Fan duo nodded. "Very strong. He must be the Ancient Demon Clan's clan master." "The Ancient Demon Clan's clan master." Yi Xian said, "How many people came?" Fan duo said, 5. Yi Xian thought for a moment, then nodded. "Understood." After saying that, he got up and left. Fan duo suddenly said, "Are you going to find them?" Yi Xian said with a smile, "Of course." Fan duo said in a deep voice, "They are very strong." Yi Xian said, "I know." After saying that, he disappeared at the end of the horizon. Fan duo sighed softly, then disappeared on the spot as well. In the main hall of Jingji's palace, there were only Jingji and Gu Ming. Jingji said with a smile, "Clan Master Gu Ming, have you thought it through?" Gu Ming nodded. "I'll deal with Yi Xian and the people behind him. You can deal with Lord and Wu Juan and the 2 supreme martial artists of this realm. Is that okay?" Jingji said in a deep voice, "The sword on Yi Xian belongs to me." Gu Ming looked at Jingji. "Okay." Jingji was about to speak when Gu Ming suddenly said, "I have an idea." Jingji said with a smile, "What is it?" Gu Ming said with a smile, "What is Yi Xian's greatest reliance? It's the man in green and the woman in plain dress. My idea is that we should get rid of these two first. As long as we get rid of them, Yi Xian will be alone and there will be nothing to worry about." Jingji was silent. Gu Ming asked, "What do you think?" After a moment of silence, Jingji said, "Clan Master Gu Ming's idea is not impossible. However, we don't know where those two are now. It will be a little difficult for us to find them." Gu Ming said with a smile, "It's not difficult. I've already contacted the Star Life sect and asked them to help us find them." Jingji suddenly said, "We can just target that Yi Xian." Gu Ming said, "If we kill Yi Xian, will the two people behind him let us go?" Jingji was silent. Gu Ming said again, "Don't worry. The ancient demon clan will deal with the two people behind him. You just need to stall Lord and Wujuan and the supreme martial artists of this realm." Jingji smiled. Gu Ming smiled, then turned and left. Inside the hall, Jingji slowly closed her eyes. Was Gu Ming stupid? Of course not. In fact, she was a little scared. If she hadn't been cautious, she would have made the same mistake as Gu Ming. Because no one thought that the woman in plain dress could jump out of this current universe, including her. Before seeing the woman in plain dress, although she also thought that the woman in plain dress was very strong, she was at most at the God Emperor realm. This was her estimation of the woman in plain dress. But after seeing her, she realized that she was wrong. He was gravely mistaken. The woman had really jumped out of this current universe. It wasn't that Gu Ming was stupid, but the woman in plain dress was too strong, so strong that it exceeded the understanding of this current universe. At this moment, Zhujiang suddenly entered the hall. Zhujiang said in a deep voice, "Holy Lord, Yi Xian is rushing here." Jingji narrowed her eyes. "What is he doing here?" Zhujiang said in a deep voice, "It should be to kill Gu Ming." Jingji frowned slightly. "Nonsense. How can he kill Gu Ming with his current strength?" After saying that, she got up and walked out of the hall. Zhujiang hurriedly said, "Holy Lord, are you going to help?" Jingji didn't look back. "Of course, young Master Yi can't die." Inside the hall, Zhujiang was dumbfounded. "Holy Lord, whose side are you on?" P.S. Sorry. Yesterday I went on a business trip and took a 9-hour high-speed train. Then I fell asleep because I was too tired. I didn't update it in advance and I couldn't get up today. I'm really sorry. Everyone, please forgive me. Chapter 1837. After Gu Ming left the palace, he entered a silent starry sky. Gu Ming glanced around and smiled. "Still not coming out?" A wisp of sword light suddenly appeared between his eyebrows. Gu Ming didn't dodge. Boom. Gu Ming's body trembled violently and he retreated hundreds of feet. When he stopped, there was a deep sword scar between his eyebrows. And opposite him was Yi Xian. Gu Ming gently touched the blood between his eyebrows and said softly, "What a terrifying sword, it can actually hurt my body." Yi Xian smiled. "What a terrifying body. My sword actually didn't shatter your body." At this moment, Yi Xian's eyes flashed with seriousness. He had just used the Azure Profound Sword. However, the other party had used his body to forcefully block his sword. This wasn't an ordinary kind of terrifying. Gu Ming looked at Yi Xian and smiled. "You are Yi Xian?" Yi Xian nodded. "Yes." Gu Ming sized Yi Xian up and said with a smile, "Not bad indeed. Just now I blocked your sword. Now you have to take my fist." The moment his voice fell, his fist had already arrived in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian's reaction was also extremely fast. The moment the fist arrived, he had already drawn his sword and slashed continuously, drawing the sword to decide life and death. Boom. A wave of sword light suddenly erupted in front of Yi Xian. Rumble. The entire starry sky was instantly annihilated. Yi Xian retreated tens of thousands of feet, but Gu Ming didn't retreat even half a step. However, there was a deep sword scar on his fist and his bones could be seen. Yi Xian's sword could break through his defense. Not only that, but after being slashed by Yi Xian's Azure Profound Sword, his entire body actually began to become somewhat illusory. Gu Ming glanced at the sword scar on his right hand, and a trace of surprise flashed in his eyes. Then he looked at Yi Xian. "Good sword." Yi Xian wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. "What a powerful body." This ancient fate's gentle voice was much stronger than he had expected. Gu Ming smiled and said, "Again." With that he took a step forward. Boom. As soon as he took that step, the starry sky was destroyed and countless stars began to vanish bit by bit. In the distance, Yi Xian's pupils suddenly shrank. He held the green profound sword in his hand and blocked the attack. Boom. Invincible sword domain. An extremely terrifying force that seemed like the sky was collapsing blasted towards Yi Xian's sword domain. However, his sword domain forcefully resisted it. Seeing this scene, Gu Ming frowned slightly. Good sword technique. As he spoke, a sword suddenly slashed down at an extremely fast speed. Before Gu Ming could react, the azure profound sword had already slashed down on his forehead. Flying swords. Boom. The sword light shattered and a deep sword mark appeared on Gu Ming's head. But he did not die, nor did he retreat. In the distance, Yi Xian opened his palm and the green profound sword returned to his hand. Gu Ming stared at Yi Xian. "These sword skills of yours are all very powerful." Yi Xian was silent. The strength of the ancient demon clan's patriarch's body was far beyond his expectations. At this time, Gu Ming suddenly said, "Your body is also not ordinary." At this moment he suddenly realized that Yi Xian's body was also not ordinary. Because although Yi Xian had been pushed back by him, Yi Xian had only suffered a minor injury. Gu Ming could not help but frown. Because he realized that he seemed to have underestimated Yi Xian. In the distance, Yi Xian was about to make a move when Xiaoan appeared beside him. Xiaoan looked at Yi Xian. "I'll do it." Yi Xian thought for a moment and then nodded. He nodded. Right. He knew that Xiaoan had always wanted to fight with Gu Ming. And he also needed Xiaoan to stall Gu Ming. Gu Ming looked at Xiaoan. "Lord and Wujuan, we meet again." Xiaoan said indifferently, "Don't talk nonsense, let's fight." As soon as her voice fell, she disappeared. In the distance, Gu Ming faintly smiled before he also disappeared. Both of them entered unknown space. Yi Xian was about to turn around and leave. At this time, Jingji appeared in front of him. Jingji smiled. "You want to kill the experts of the ancient demon clan?" Yi Xian asked with a smile. "Are you going to stop me?" Jingji shook his head. "I just want to remind you of one thing." Yi Xian asked, "What is it?" Jingji looked at Yi Xian. "The whole ancient god world knows that you have the mysterious Xiao Ta." Hearing this, Yi Xian frowned. "The whole ancient god world?" Jingji smiled. "Yes. Many people are very interested in you, Xiao Ta, especially the ancient demon clan and the very clan." Yi Xian asked, "What about you?" Jingji blinked and then said, "I am also very interested." Yi Xian smiled. "You want me to fight the experts of the ancient god world, and then you will be the fisherman?" Jingji nodded. "Yes." Yi Xian suddenly let out a sigh. Jingji was puzzled. "Why are you sighing?" Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. "Miss Jingji, I heard from Xiaoan about the grudge between you and her. I think your father was right to choose Xiaoan." Hearing this, Jingji's eyes narrowed and there was killing intent in them. Yi Xian smiled. "Do you know why? Because you focused too much on playing tricks. And tricks can't make your Saint Hall stronger. Of course, intelligence is also a part of strength. But you have ignored the most important point, and that is strength." Jingji shook his head and smiled. "Are you teaching me?" Yi Xian shook his head. "Miss Jingji, you think you have the whole universe in your hands, but in fact you are wrong." Jingji smiled. "Wrong? Where am I wrong?" Yi Xian suddenly opened his palm and Xiao Ta appeared in it. He pointed with a finger and Xiao Ta fell in front of Jingji. Jingji frowned. "What do you mean?" Yi Xian smiled. "Xiao Ta is right in front of you and I am giving it to you now. Do you dare to take it?" "Dare?" Jingji's eyes narrowed. She really didn't dare. Naturally, it wasn't because of Yi Xian, but because of the woman in the plain dress. The cold gaze of the woman in the plain dress appeared in her mind once more. Yi Xian smiled. "Take it." Jingji stared at Yi Xian. "Are you trying to humiliate me?" Yi Xian shook his head. "Miss Jingji, I'm not that bored. Someone once asked me, why do we have to stare at this universe? Why can't we have a bigger picture?" Jingji narrowed her eyes. "What do you mean?" Yi Xian smiled. "Even if you dominate this current universe, is there any meaning? Is there?" Jingji said in a deep voice. "What do you mean?" Yi Xian looked at Jingji. "Qinger has already jumped out of this current universe, do you know that?" Jingji looked at Yi Xian but did not say anything. Yi Xian said again, I know how to jump out of this current universe. Hearing this, Jingji's eyelids twitched. You know? Yi Xian smiled. Of course I know. Jingji asked subconsciously, how can you jump out of this current universe? Yi Xian smiled. Why should I tell you? Jingji stared at Yi Xian. You don't know. Yi Xian nodded. You are right. You're right, I didn't know. After saying that, he turned around and left. Jingji's face was a little ugly. Damn, this man is actually tempting me. Without any hesitation, Jingji followed Yi Xian. Yi Xian glanced at Jingji. Miss Jingji, what's the matter? Jingji said in a deep voice. I have seen your sister. Yi Xian nodded. I know. Jingji turned to look at Yi Xian. You know? Yi Xian smiled. I guessed. Jingji looked at Yi Xian. How can I jump out of this universe? Yi Xian asked. Why should I tell you? Jingji stared at Yi Xian for a long time, and then said with a smile. So you are trying to trick me into working for you? Yi Xian smiled. Miss Jingji, do you know why the Supreme of this universe is helping me? Not only them, but there are also more than a dozen God Emperor. Jingji suddenly frowned. More than a dozen God Emperor. Yi Xian blinked. Yes. There are more than a dozen God Emperor. They are all helping me, what's wrong? Jingji stared at Yi Xian. Where did these more than a dozen God Emperor come from? Yi Xian laughed. It's a secret. Secret. Jingji was silent. Yi Xian said again. Miss Jingji, your eyes are still on this universe, but many people have set their eyes outside the universe. If you don't jump out of this universe, you will eventually return to dust, dust to dust. As she said that, she glanced at Jingji. Do you know why Qing Air is so powerful? Because she has mastered the great Tao of this universe, which is above the great Tao. Do you know what is above the great Tao? Jingji asked. What is above the great Tao? Yi Xian laughed. It's a secret. Secret. I don't tell ordinary people. Jingji stared at Yi Xian. You are trying to fool me. Yi Xian nodded quickly. Yes, yes. I am trying to fool you, Miss Jingji. You must not believe my words. What jump out of the universe, what great Tao? Actually, I am just fooling you. You must not believe me. After saying that, he quickly walked away into the distance. Jingji stared at Yi Xian in the distance. At this moment, she wanted to skin Yi Xian alive. Her intuition told her that Yi Xian was fooling her. But reason told her that Yi Xian might really know how to jump out of this universe. Because the plain-dressed woman had already jumped out of this universe. And what was the relationship between the plain-dressed woman and Yi Xian? They were brother and sister. Moreover, the plain-dressed woman's love for Yi Xian could be described as spoiling. Even if Yi Xian didn't know, if Yi Xian asked, would the plain-dressed woman not tell him? She would definitely tell him. Jingji suddenly raised her head and looked at the sky. Her eyes were a little blank. Just like what Yi Xian said, wasn't her vision too small? Was it interesting to dominate this universe? Of course it was interesting, but it was definitely not as interesting as jumping out of this universe. That was completely different. Jumping out of this universe in the history of the ancient god world, no one could do it. Moreover, who didn't want to see the scenery outside the universe? And above the great Tao, Jingji looked at the end of the starry sky in the distance. Did she really have to rely on this bastard? She was not willing. However, what Yi Xian said was too tempting. At the end of the starry sky in the distance, Xiao Ta in Yi Xian's body suddenly asked, Young master, what is above the great Tao? Yi Xian said, I am just making things up and you believe me? After a moment of silence, Xiao Ta said, I was too careless. Chapter 1838. Yi Xian arrived at an unknown part of the starry sky, and there were 6 people in this part of the starry sky. They were the experts of the ancient devil clan who had come with Gu Yi, and his target was these 6 people. In the dark, Yi Xian glanced at the 6 people. All 6 of them wore black robes and their auras were as deep as the sea. Very strong. Yi Xian's gaze descended onto the old man in the lead. Suddenly the old man opened his eyes. Watch out. As soon as he finished speaking, he pressed his right hand forward. Bang. The entire starry sky boiled. In the dark, Yi Xian was shocked. Have I been discovered? But he quickly realized that he hadn't been discovered. In the distance, the black-robed old man frowned. At this moment, the black-robed old man by his side suddenly said, Elder Gu Yi, is someone here? Gu Yi glanced around again and then he said, I felt a little uneasy just now. As he spoke he glanced around again. Everyone be careful. Xian is skilled in assassination techniques and he has a divine sword. Don't underestimate him. The others behind him nodded. They had heard of Xian's assassination techniques. They didn't dare to be careless. In next to no time, the 6 of them released powerful sure that enveloped the area they were in. In the dark Xian's face sank. Now that these 6 people were on guard, it wouldn't be easy to kill them. What a headache. Right at this moment, Gu Yi suddenly raised his head and a moment later his eyes narrowed. The demon lord is fighting within Wujuan, and I don't know where Xian has gone. As he spoke he glanced around. Xian come out. He was sure that Xian was in the dark. And that trace of uneasiness just now was definitely because of Xian. That fellow wanted to assassinate them. In the distance the space trembled slightly and then Xian walked out. Gu Yi's eyes narrowed slightly when he saw Xian, and he was just about to speak when Xian suddenly vanished on the spot. Gu Yi's pupils constricted. Let's join forces. As soon as their voices fell, the 6 of them attacked at the same time. Boom. The surrounding space boiled and then was annihilated. Rumble. A sword light suddenly retreated. It was Xian. Xian retreated a full 3,000 feet before stopping. When he stopped, the 6 people in the distance had already surrounded him. All 6 of them punched out at the same time. Rumble. In the blink of an eye, the space Xian was in turned into a vortex. The 6 of them were too powerful. The space that Xian was in couldn't withstand it at all. Even the power of time was annihilated at this moment. Xian took a step forward and blocked with his sword. Invincible sword domain. Boom. The space that Xian resided in was instantly obliterated. But Xian was completely fine. The invincible sword domain had forcefully resisted their full strength. Gu Yi's expression instantly became unsightly when he witnessed this scene. This fellow is that strong? Right at this moment Xian suddenly charged towards Gu Yi, and then he drew his sword and slashed. Gu Yi's pupils constricted and he hurriedly said, Help me. As soon as he finished speaking he swiftly raised his arms to block the attack. At the same time the other 5 behind him hurriedly attacked as well. They were going head-on against Xian. Rumble. An expanse of sword light suddenly shattered into pieces. Xian retreated explosively for 3 kilometers while Gu Yi and the others retreated explosively for almost 3 kilometers as well. After Gu Yi stopped moving his expression had become quite unsightly. At this moment his entire right arm was gone. All 6 of them hadn't been able to completely resist that attack from Xian. Xian was quite shocked in his heart as well. The strength of these 6 people is very extraordinary. They're probably the type that doesn't rely on any external strength. Xian didn't give it any further thought before he vanished on the spot. A ray of sword light flashed through the battlefield. Gu Yi's expression instantly changed violently. Attack together. As soon as he finished speaking he and the other 5 behind him charged forward. The battle had begun. Xian was fighting all 6 of them by himself. All 6 of them were at the peak of the godhood realm and they'd formed godheads. Moreover, they were the type that didn't rely on any external strength. However, even then not only were they unable to gain an advantage against Xian, they were even suppressed by Xian. Xian's sword wasn't just swift, it was able to pierce through their defenses. Compared to Xian's sword, the so-called divine body was like a piece of paper. Jingji watched silently from the shadows. She'd been watching while Xian fought Gu Yi and the others. At this moment she had a solemn expression on her face. She'd always known that Xian was strong, but she didn't expect Xian to be this strong. Gu Yi and the others weren't your average godhood realm experts. These 6 people belonged to the top echelons of the ancient demon clan. They were all old monsters that had lived for at least several 100,000 years. Not only their strength but also their battle experience. They were all battle-hardened veterans. And now the 6 of them were being suppressed by Xian. Xian was only at the divine physique realm. Fighting 6 people at a higher realm. Was this Xian's true strength? In her opinion it definitely wasn't. Because Xian still had that terrifying bloodline power that he hadn't used yet. Mad demon bloodline. Right now Xian was using these 6 people as practice targets. Xian had just reached the divine physique realm. What he needed the most now was to fight. Xiao and Jingji and the others were too strong, so they weren't suitable for practice. They would only get beaten up. Gu Yi and the others' strength was just right. They were perfect practice targets. In the distance, Yi Xian grew stronger as he fought, and Gu Yi and the others were completely suppressed by Yi Xian. Yi Xian's sword was too strong, and the 6 of them didn't dare to take it head-on. Right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly stopped. As soon as he stopped, Gu Yi's expression changed drastically, and he grabbed his own throat with his right hand. Bang! His throat suddenly split open and a stream of blood sprayed out. A single strike to the head. Gu Yi roared madly, "Attack!" As soon as he finished speaking, the 5 people behind him vanished on the spot. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly drew his sword and slashed. Rumble! An expanse of the starry sky shattered and the 5 people were pushed back. When they finally stopped, Gu Yi's head had already flown into the air. In the end, he hadn't been able to suppress Yi Xian's attack. Not only did his head fly into the air, but his soul was instantly absorbed by Yi Xian's sword. The remaining 5 people's expressions changed drastically when they witnessed this scene, and one of them said abruptly, "Retreat." As soon as he finished speaking, he and the other 4 turned around and fled. They were extremely swift and they vanished into the horizon in the blink of an eye. Yi Xian frowned slightly. They're running away just like that. They're not going to fight head-on anymore? Meanwhile, Jingji suddenly walked out. "Young Master Yi, you're really surprising." Yi Xian turned to look at Jingji and smiled. "Miss Jingji, is there something you need? If there's something, then please speak frankly. If there's nothing else, then I'll be leaving. As you know, I'm very busy." Jingji gazed at Yi Xian. "Can you really make that woman tell you how to escape from this universe?" Yi Xian turned around and left. Jingji frowned slightly. In the next moment, she appeared in front of Yi Xian, and she gazed at Yi Xian and smiled. "We can work together." Yi Xian shook his head. "I won't work together." Jingji frowned slightly. "Why?" Yi Xian smiled. "Because you're not sincere. Miss Jingji, you're a smart person, but you're too smart." After saying that, he turned around and disappeared into the horizon on his sword. Jingji was silent. Of course, she knew what Yi Xian meant. How could he be sincere? He could directly declare war on the ancient demon clan. That meant he was sincere. But if he declared war on the ancient demon clan, her plan would be ruined. Moreover, the relationship between Yi Xian and Xiaoan was better than hers. In fact, the real barrier between her and Yi Xian was Xiaoan. If there was no Xiaoan, she would definitely choose Yi Xian, but with Xiaoan she was a little hesitant. Because she and Xiaoan would never reconcile. But if she did not choose Yi Xian, Xiaoan would definitely be able to rely on Yi Xian to reach a higher level in the future. At that time, the gap between her and Xiaoan would become infinitely large. With this thought in mind, Jingji turned around and left. At this moment, she had made up her mind. Yi Xian came to the star field where Xiaoan and the ancient demon clan patriarch were fighting. He had to admit that the ancient demon clan patriarch was indeed very strong. An expert at the peak of the divine soul realm. An expert at this level was not someone that Yi Xian could deal with for the time being. After all, he had cultivated for at least hundreds of thousands of years. Whether it was his combat experience or the use of various martial arts, he had reached the peak. In fact, Yi Xian was also a little shocked by Xiaoan's strength. The Xiaoan was not just a normal kind of fierce. They were both the top super experts in the divine ancient star field. At this moment, in the distant starry sky, Gu Ming suddenly split into 3. The next moment, the 3 of them punched at the same time. Rumble. Under the 3 punches, Xiaoan directly retreated tens of thousands of zhang, and at the same time the star field was annihilated. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian frowned. This time Xiaoan had suffered a big loss. He looked at Gu Ming and saw 2 people who looked exactly like him on the left and right of Gu Ming. Doppelganger? At first, Yi Xian suspected that it was a doppelganger, but could a doppelganger have such terrifying power? In the distance, Xiaoan suddenly said, "Doppelganger." Gu Ming smiled slightly. "Yes. In all of history, I am the only one who has cultivated it to the great success stage." Doppelganger. This was a supreme divine skill of the ancient demon clan. If cultivated to the extreme, one could split into 3, that is, doppelganger. And in the entire ancient demon clan, only 2 people had successfully cultivated this supreme divine skill. The first was the ancestor of the ancient demon clan who created this cultivation method, and the second was this Gu Ming. The two doppelganger could have almost 90% of the strength of the main body. This was very terrifying. In the distance, Xiaoan slowly clenched her right hand. Naturally, she would not admit defeat. Just as she was about to attack again in the distance, Gu Ming suddenly turned his head to look at Yi Xian below. The next moment, he and the two doppelganger beside him disappeared. Rumble. Three terrifying forces that could destroy the world were heading straight for Yi Xian. Xiaoan's expression changed drastically. She stomped her right foot and disappeared from where she stood, shrinking the ground to an inch. At this moment, her speed directly surpassed the space and time of this universe. Of course, this was only for a moment. And this was also one of her trump cards. In the blink of an eye, Xiaoan appeared in the air above Yi Xian and blocked with her arms. Rumble. Before Yi Xian could react, two figures retreated at the same time. It was Xiaoan and Gu Ming. The two each retreated a full 10,000 zhang before stopping. When Xiaoan stopped, her arms directly turned into nothingness. Not only that, but a trace of blood slowly flowed from the corner of her mouth. But the next moment she appeared in front of Yi Xian again with her back to Yi Xian. Go first. Go first. Looking at Xiaoan, who had lost both arms in front of him, Yi Xian was completely dumbfounded. P.S. Thank you for your votes. When I go home today, I will go home and write properly. I will never think about those fancy things again. Writing is the way of the king. Only by writing can one become rich. Also, some readers say that I am very popular. I really want to say, where do you see that I am popular? If you want to sell the copyright, shooting a TV series or an anime is the way to become popular. No one wants this of mine. Among web writers, I belong to the category of half-flops. I don't eat too much, but I won't starve to death. When the copyright comes out, then it will be considered popular. Or, when I dare to stop updating, then it will also be popular. Only people who don't lack money dare to be willful. Have you seen me being willful? Chapter 1839. Seeing that Yi Xian didn't move, Xiaoan frowned and said, "You go first." An ancient fate who had cultivated the external incarnation to great success was no longer someone she could deal with now. After all, compared to this ancient fate, she didn't have much time to cultivate. Yi Xian still didn't move. Xiaoan was about to speak when Yi Xian suddenly appeared beside her and chuckled. "Why do you want me to go first?" Xiaoan looked at Yi Xian. "We can't beat him anymore." Yi Xian smiled. "Then I go and you die?" Xiaoan fell silent. Yi Xian said softly, "Go back to Xiao Ta and heal your injuries." Xiaoan stared at Yi Xian. "You can't beat him." Yi Xian said with a smile. "So what? In any case, I won't let my woman die for me." Xiaoan frowned slightly. "Your woman?" Yi Xian smiled awkwardly. "A slip of the tongue. A slip of the tongue." Xiaoan glanced at Yi Xian and didn't say anything. Yi Xian said, "Hurry up and enter Xiao Ta." As he spoke, he directly sent Xiaoan into Xiao Ta. In the distance, Gu Ming sized up Yi Xian and smiled. "You are very outstanding. Even in the divine ancient star field, you are the most outstanding." Yi Xian smiled. "Thank you for the compliment." Gu Ming smiled and said, "Actually, I want to see the two people behind you. They are your father and sister. According to my investigation, they don't seem to be ordinary." Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, "You remind me of someone who was once as confident as you." Gu Ming smiled. "Who?" Yi Xian said, "Tianyi." "Tianyi." Gu Ming frowned slightly. "Who's Tianyi?" Yi Xian smiled and said, "The patriarch of the ancient heaven realms Yi clan used to be as confident as you, but now the grass on his grave is already several zhang tall." "Tianyi." Gu Ming shook his head and smiled. "You're comparing me to an ant?" Yi Xian said, "In the eyes of Qing an old man, the two of you are no different." "Huh." Gu Ming suddenly laughed. "Yi Xian, you're so arrogant. Of course, the reason you're arrogant is because you're ignorant." Yi Xian smiled. "Maybe." As he spoke, he opened his palm and the green profound sword appeared in his hand. "I think that men should talk less nonsense between each other." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly vanished on the spot. In the distance, Gu Ming suddenly flicked his sleeve. Boom. An earth-shattering power surged out from his sleeves. Rumble. A sword light shattered and Yi Xian was instantly sent flying. But the moment Yi Xian retreated, A sword light suddenly appeared at Gu Ming's throat. One sword cut through the head. Crack. Gu Ming's throat suddenly split open, but the next moment his right hand directly grabbed the sword light at his throat. He clenched his fist. Boom. The sword light shattered. But at this moment Xian suddenly appeared above his head, and the next moment, a sword light slashed straight down. Gu Ming's eyes narrowed slightly and he directly punched out. Rumble. Another sword light shattered, and Xian was directly sent flying, while Gu Ming also violently retreated hundreds of meters. Sword draw to determine life and death. This time, Xian directly superimposed 920 sword draw to determine life and death. During the time he cultivated in Xiaota's body, he increased the number of sword draw to determine life and death to 920. However, he found that the further he went, the harder it was to improve. In the distance, Gu Ming glanced at his right hand. There was a deep sword wound on his right arm and the white bone within could be seen. Gu Ming's eyes narrowed slightly and he raised his head to look at the distant Xian. He was about to speak when the azure sword in Xian's hand suddenly disappeared. Gu Ming directly punched out. Boom. The azure sword was forcibly stopped by this punch. But at this moment over a dozen sword lights suddenly flew out from the space around Gu Ming and slashed at his body. Boom. 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 In an instant, Gu Ming was directly drowned by over a dozen sword lights. In the distance Xian was about to follow up with another attack. But at this moment the sword light directly shattered his face and at the same time, an afterimage shot explosively towards him. Xian's expression changed drastically. He opened his palm and the azure sword appeared in his hand, and then he suddenly held it horizontally to block. Invincible sword domain. Boom. Xian instantly retreated thousands of meters, and as soon as he stopped, a trace of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. In the distance Gu Ming slowly walked towards Xian. The sword is a good sword and the sword technique is also a good sword technique. Unfortunately, your cultivation is too low and, at this moment Xian suddenly disappeared on the spot. Gu Ming raised his arm to block. Boom. The sword light exploded and Xian retreated explosively once more. However, there was another sword wound on Gu Ming's arm. Gu Ming couldn't help but frown. Although there was a gap in strength between him and Xian's sword could break through his defense. He couldn't let this drag on. Gu Ming raised his head to look at the nearby Xian. He took a step forward and with this step he split into three. External incarnation. When he saw Gu Ming's external incarnation, Xian didn't hesitate to turn around and directly disappear. He naturally wouldn't be stupid enough to fight Gu Ming head-on. Seeing Xian escape, Gu Ming was stunned. He stopped fighting just like that. Shouldn't it be a fight to the death? Without thinking too much, Gu Ming took a step forward and was about to give chase. However, when he was about to give chase, he found that Xian had already disappeared. Even he couldn't sense Xian's aura at this moment. He ran so fast. Gu Ming's expression was a little ugly. Were young people nowadays so greedy for life and afraid of death? Moreover, Xian was a swordsman. Right at this moment his pupils constricted abruptly because Xian who had fled had actually appeared in front of him again. Xian drew his sword and slashed. 920 superimposed sword drawing techniques. Gu Ming was shocked. He didn't expect Xian to appear again. Without thinking too much he raised his arm to block. Boom. Xian's sword fell and Gu Ming directly retreated thousands of feet away. When he stopped and was ready to counterattack, Xian was already gone. He ran again. Seeing this scene, Gu Ming's expression suddenly became extremely ugly. One slash and then run? And he couldn't catch Xian's aura. He had power but nowhere to use it. It was very sullen. And in another unknown starry sky, Xian stopped, a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. Gu Ming's strength was much higher than his, and most importantly, Gu Ming's physical body was too terrifying. If it wasn't for Gu Ming's terrifying physical body, he would have killed him countless times just now. The profound azure sword could break Gu Ming's defense, but it couldn't kill him. And at this moment he finally saw his own strength clearly. With his current strength, if he didn't use the profound azure sword, it was equivalent to the divine spark realm. But if he used the profound azure sword, he would be invincible in the divine spark realm and could fight against divine soul realm experts. But if he didn't use the profound azure sword, then the gap between him and a divine soul realm expert would be too huge. Especially a super expert like Gu Ming who didn't rely on his strength. However, he wasn't discouraged. How many years had Gu Ming cultivated and how many years had Xian cultivated? Wasn't it normal for him to be unable to defeat Gu Ming? In terms of mentality, he still had the right attitude. Moreover, being defeated really wasn't a bad thing. Because he knew what he was lacking. Right at this moment, Xiaoan appeared in front of Xian. Xian glanced at Xiaoan, and at this moment Xiaoan's arms had returned to normal. Xiaoan sized up Xian and then he said, "Are you all right?" Xian nodded. "I'm fine." Xiaoan said softly, "I never expected that he would have already cultivated that avatar technique to greater success." Xian said in a low voice, "What divine ability is that avatar technique?" When Gu Ming used his avatar technique, he could only choose to flee. The strength of the three was too terrifying and he couldn't resist at all. Xiaoan said in a low voice, "It is a supreme divine ability of the ancient demon clan. When cultivated to greater success, one can form an avatar technique, and this avatar technique has at least 90% of the original's strength." 90% strength. Xian's eyelids twitched. So abnormal. Xiaoan nodded. Very terrifying. However, it is very difficult to cultivate to this level. Among the ancestors of the ancient demon clan, except for the first ancestor, no one has been able to cultivate it to greater success. I didn't expect that after so many years, Gu Ming had cultivated it to greater success. Xian asked, "Is there a way to break it?" Xiaoan shook his head. "Can only be broken by force." "Broken by force." Xian suddenly said, "Can you break it with my sword?" Xiaoan glanced at the profound azure sword in Xian's hand and shook his head. "I can't. Because I'm not a swordsman. In my hand the power that your sword can display is not as great as yours. But," she paused, then said, "if Jingji uses your sword, he should be able to fight him." Jingji. Xian shook his head and smiled. "Give it to her? I'm afraid she'll kill me first." He was also very wary of this Jingji. This woman was different from Gu Ming. Although Gu Ming was strong, he didn't play dirty. This woman, on the other hand, liked to play dirty. As if thinking of something, Xian suddenly asked, "Xiaoan, don't you hate her?" Xiaoan was silent for a moment, then said, "Her father treats me very well." Xian said with a smile, "If you could kill her, would you?" Xiaoan shook his head. "I don't know." Xian sighed in his heart. He knew that Xiaoan wouldn't kill Jingji. But if Jingji was given the chance, he would kill Xiaoan. Xiaoan suddenly said, "You heal first, then we need to prepare. Gu Ming won't give up. Also, we need to be careful because you have 2 divine items. I'm worried that the very race will be tempted." Xian asked, "Are the very race very strong?" Xiaoan nodded. "Very strong. There is a person in their race named Very Yishui. This person was the strongest of the very race and the strongest of the ancient god world. If they know that you have 2 divine items, I'm afraid they will be tempted." Xian was speechless. He was going to be in high demand again. But he couldn't be so unlucky, could he? At this moment, Jingji suddenly appeared in front of Xian. She smiled. "I have bad news for you. The very race is here. For you." Xian was speechless. Chapter 1840. The Very Ones. Xian was speechless. What he had been worried about had come true. He seemed to have thought of something. Xian looked at Jingji, who shook his head. "I didn't inform them this time. The Saint Church and the ancient demons came here to find you. That attracted them." Xian looked at Jingji and smiled. "Miss Jingji, have you made up your mind?" Jingji was silent. She understood what Xian meant. Xian smiled. "Miss Jingji, I will give you one last chance. If you don't take this chance, I won't give you any more chances. Believe me, you will never be able to escape this universe again. Because the direction of your cultivation is wrong." Jingji frowned. "The direction of cultivation is wrong?" Xian nodded. "Yes." As he spoke, he paused for a moment and said, said that." Jingji looked at Xian. "Really?" Xian laughed. "Believe it or not, it's up to you." With that, he turned around and left with Xiaoan. At this time, Xiaoan suddenly turned to look at Xian. "Why are you holding my hand?" Xian smiled. "Sorry, I'm used to it." Shaoan frowned. Used to it. Yixian was speechless. Shaoan wanted to say something but Yixian suddenly said, Shaoan, tell me about the very ones. I have to make some preparations. Shaoan nodded. She was about to speak but she seemed to think of something. She turned to look at Yixian. Can you let go of my hand first? Yixian said seriously. And you don't think I'm taking advantage of you by holding your hand, do you? Shaoan looked at Yixian and did not speak. Yixian said, I am not that kind of person. Shaoan asked, why are you holding my hand then? Yixian quietly said, when I heard that the very ones were coming I panicked. Holding your hand I felt more at ease. Shaoan looked at Yixian. Really? Yixian nodded. Really? If you're not willing I won't pull you. Although he said so he did not release his hand. After a moment of silence Shaoan said, the very ones are strong, but you don't have to worry too much. Yixian smiled bitterly. I'm alone. How can I not be worried? Shaoan immediately said, don't you have me? Yixian looked at Shaoan, will you stay here forever? Shaoan nodded. Yixian said seriously, Shaoan, you're the best. Shaoan glanced at Yixian. What's good about it? Yixian laughed and said, everything is fine. Shaoan was speechless. Just as Yixian was about to speak, Jingji suddenly appeared in front of Yixian and Yixian frowned. Jingji suddenly said, the person from the very high sect is the very high water. Hearing this Shaoan's eyes suddenly shrank. Very high water? Jingji nodded. Yixian turned to look at Shaoan, is he very strong? Shaoan said in a deep voice, very strong. He was very strong back then and he must be even stronger now. The opponent's strength is definitely above the ancient demon clan leader Gu Ming. Yixian held Shaoan's hand tightly and said nervously, what should I do? Jingji was speechless. Shaoan was silent and her face was grave. If the very high water was also targeting Yixian the situation would be really troublesome. At this time Jingji suddenly said, you can call for help. Yixian looked at Jingji and smiled. Miss Jingji, what do you want to do? Jingji smiled. Cooperate. Yixian shook his head. I said, you have no sincerity. Jingji's lips curled up. Sincerity is mutual. Yixian suddenly asked, do I need you? Jingji was stunned. Jingji blinked. Have you seen Qing Air? Jingji stared at Yixian and did not speak. Yixian smiled. Do I need you? As you said, if I can't beat him I can call for help. This chapter is not finished, please turn the page. Jingji rolled his eyes at Yixian. Why are you so hostile to him? Yixian shook his head and smiled. Because you have always been hostile to me. Jingji smiled. I am not hostile to you and I dare not be. Young Master Yi, I have a plan here, do you want to hear it? Yixian blinked. What plan? Jingji walked in front of Yixian and smiled. I will only say it to you. Yixian smiled. Shaoan is one of us. If you want to say it, then say it. If you don't, then don't say it. Shaoan glanced at Yixian and did not say anything. Jingji glanced at the two of them and smiled. Young Master Yi, you and in Wujuan won't. Shaoan frowned. Yixian looked straight at Jingji. Are you going to say it or not? Jingji glared at Yixian. We are both women. Why are you treating me differently? Yixian curled his lips. You are not my woman. Jingji smiled faintly. Then is Shaoan your woman? Yixian's face was full of black lines. Damn it. I fell into this woman's trap. Jingji wanted to say something but Yixian suddenly said, do you still want to jump out of this universe? Jingji put away his smile and said, my plan is. A moment later Yixian suddenly gave a thumbs up. Brilliant. Jingji smiled. Wait for me. After saying that she turned and left. After Jingji disappeared into the distance Shaoan suddenly said, can you trust her? Yixian nodded. Yes. Shaoan looked at Yixian. Why? Yixian said softly, because she has seen Qing. Shaoan was puzzled. Yixian smiled. Anyone who has seen Qing will lose their temper. After saying that he pulled Shaoan and left. If Jingji had never seen Qing he would never believe her. However, this woman had seen Qing. Not only had she seen Qing, but she might have also been taught a lesson by Qing. Otherwise, this woman would not have taken the initiative to show goodwill. Jingji's palace. On this day, Gu Ming came to Jingji's palace. In the main hall, Jingji smiled and said, Patriarch Guming, please sit. Guming sat to the side and said softly, this Yi Xian's strength is a little beyond my expectations. Jingji shook his head and smiled. Patriarch Guming, I told you long ago not to underestimate this person. Guming smiled. Actually, I am more interested in the woman behind him. Hearing this, Jingji's right hand couldn't help but tremble. Interested in the woman in the plain dress? Jingji looked at Guming in front of her. She actually wanted to jump up and scold him. Who do you think you are? How dare you fight with senior? She admitted that Guming was very strong. However, he was really not qualified to fight with the woman in the plain dress. Guming suddenly said, Miss Jingji, do you know the whereabouts of the woman in the plain dress? Jingji collected his thoughts and shook his head with a smile. I don't know. Guming looked at Jingji and said, as far as I know, Miss Jingji has seen that plain-dressed woman through time reversal. I have indeed seen him but only once, said Jingji with a smile. Guming asked, Miss Jingji, how do you think I compare to her? Estimate the strength of both sides. The corners of Jingji's mouth twitched slightly. Estimate your mother's head. He was a little speechless. Seeing Jingji's strange expression, Guming frowned slightly. Miss Jingji. Jingji restrained his thoughts, and then he said with a serious expression, according to my estimation, that woman's strength should be on par with the ancient Fate clan's patriarch. Guming faintly smiled. That's interesting. I never thought that there would be such a person in this universe. Jingji laughed and said, indeed, I didn't expect that this universe could actually produce such a person. Guming slowly closed his eyes. I wonder if the Star Fate Gate has found any news about that plain-dressed woman. Jingji's eyelids twitched. If this chapter is not finished, please turn the page. This guy really sent people to look for the plain-dressed woman. Jingji sighed in her heart. In fact, she felt a little complicated at this moment. Did Guming look down on the plain-dressed woman? Of course he did. However, from Guming's point of view, Guming had overestimated the plain-dressed woman. After all, no one thought that the plain-dressed woman had jumped out of this current universe, including her from before. When they targeted Yi Xian from the beginning, they were already destined to lose. This was also the reason why she immediately chose to side with Yi Xian. Kill Yi Xian? They would definitely die. Once the plain-dressed woman came back, no one could stop her. With a wave of her hand, the Saint Church and the ancient demon clan would disappear from this world. At this moment, Guming suddenly said, Miss Jingji, I heard that the Supreme Life Water is also here. Jingji withdrew her thoughts and nodded. Yes. Guming smiled and said, what do you think, Miss Jingji? Jingji smiled and said, let's join forces to deal with him and Yi Xian. Guming nodded. That's exactly what I want. Jingji suddenly stood up and said, Patriarch Guming, my people have found that Yi Xian. Guming's eyes narrowed slightly. Jingji said, let's go. With that, she directly disappeared. Guming frowned slightly and a moment later he also disappeared from the hall. In a certain part of the starry sky, Yi Xian was flying on his sword and Shaoan was beside him. At this moment, Jingji and Guming suddenly appeared in front of him. When he saw the two of them, Yi Xian's expression instantly changed. You, Jingji said, Patriarch Guming, I'll stop that Lord in Wujuan. Finish him quickly. Guming nodded. He took a step forward and directly displayed his avatar. Just as Guming was about to attack, his expression instantly changed. He suddenly turned around and a sword light slashed straight towards him. The person who attacked was not Yi Xian but Jingji. This sudden turn of events caused Guming's expression to instantly change, and he suddenly blocked with his arms. Boom! The sword light shattered and Guming rapidly retreated. At this moment, Yi Xian and Jingji disappeared from where they stood at the same time. The three of them attacked almost at the same time. And at this moment, a shadow suddenly flashed across the battlefield. Boom! Along with a deafening explosion resounding out, the two figures were pushed back repeatedly. It was Yi Xian and Shaoan. And beside Guming stood a middle-aged man. When they saw this middle-aged man, Shaoan and Jingji's expressions both darkened. Great One Water. A super expert of the Great One race. Guming suddenly turned his head to look at Jingji and said with a smile, Miss Jingji, from the beginning my ancient demon race has been using you, And you have also been using my ancient demon race. Do you really think I wouldn't hold back? Jingji smiled and said, I was too careless. As she spoke, she turned her head to look at Yi Xian. Call for help. Yi Xian was silent. I want to call for help too. But how? Jingji looked at Yi Xian. Don't tell me you can't call for help. Yi Xian smiled awkwardly. Today is a good day. How about we let them go? Jingji stared at Yi Xian. Yi Xian sighed softly. Miss Jingji, do you think Qing is interested in them? Jingji was silent. That woman might really not be interested in Gu Ming and Jingji. As if thinking of something, Jingji looked at Yi Xian in confusion. Why is your sister so strong and you so weak? Yi Xian thought for a moment and then said, I actually want to know the answer to this question. Jingji. P.S. I really don't have the face to ask for a vote. No more begging. End of this chapter. Chapter 1841. Yi Xian and the others did not expect that Tai Yishui had joined forces with Gu Ming. This was a person stronger than Gu Ming. How could they fight? They couldn't beat him. In the distance, Gu Ming suddenly laughed. Miss Jingji, I'm really curious. Why did you side with Yi Xian? Jingji said calmly, if I don't side with him, I will be swallowed by you and the Greater One sect, won't I? The ancient demon clan had joined forces with the Greater One race, but they didn't tell her. They obviously wanted to use her to deal with Yi Xian and then swallow her and the Saint Church. Everyone was plotting against each other. Gu Ming laughed. Don't you want to join forces with Yi Xian to swallow my ancient demon clan? Jingji laughed. Same here. Gu Ming nodded. Indeed. At this moment, Tai Yishui suddenly looked at Yi Xian and laughed. Is the Xiaota in your hand really that amazing? Yi Xian laughed. Yes. Tai Yishui looked at Yi Xian. Can you let me see it? Yi Xian shook his head. What a joke. If I give it to you, will you give it back to me? Tai Yishui laughed. That's true. But since you won't give it to me, I'll take it myself. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly disappeared. Next to Yi Xian, Shaoan stepped forward and punched. Boom. As the fist light exploded, Shaoan instantly retreated thousands of feet. As soon as she stopped, the space within thousands of feet of her collapsed and was annihilated. No match. Yi Xian's face darkened. Tai Yishui was indeed stronger than Gu Ming. Tai Yishui glanced at Shaoan and laughed. Lord and Wujuan, you were very good in the past. Unfortunately, you haven't improved in these years. You are no match for me now. Shaoan slowly clenched her right hand and suddenly disappeared. In the distance, Tai Yishui laughed and waved his sleeve. Boom. Shaoan instantly returned to her original position. At this moment, a wisp of blood was already flowing out from the corner of her mouth. Tai Yixing smiled and said, the current you is a little weak. Shaoan was silent. He had wasted too much time. Back in the day, she and the Tai water had a 50-60 split. And now she was no longer a match for the Tai Xing water. Things are for people. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly appeared beside Shaoan and said with a smile, don't be discouraged. Shaoan shook his head. I'm not discouraged. I'm just feeling a little emotional. As she spoke, she looked at Yi Xian. If you hadn't met me, you wouldn't be in such trouble. Are you blaming me? Yi Xian laughed and said, strange. Shaoan lowered his head. I'm sorry. Yi Xian continued. I blame myself for not meeting you earlier. And looked up at Yi Xian and said nothing. Yi Xian chuckled. What about you? Shaoan was silent. Just as Yi Xian was about to speak, Jingji suddenly said, please, even if the two of you want to flirt, can't you do it on a different occasion? Is this a duel? Shaoan glanced at Jingji and did not say anything. Yi Xian laughed and looked at Tai Yixing in the distance. Your Excellency, I heard that you are the #1 expert of the ancient god star field. Tai Yixing smiled and said, Brother Gu Ming is also very outstanding. I am not completely confident in defeating him. Yi Xian sighed in his heart. His words were watertight. Gu Ming glanced at Yi Xian. If you want to sow discord, I advise you to save your saliva. Yi Xian smiled and said, I just want to fight the #1 expert of the ancient god world. Tai Yixing smiled and said, fight me one-on-one? Yi Xian nodded. Tai Yixing smiled. This chapter is not over, please continue. Sure. Gu Ming suddenly said, Brother Xianxia, this person is not simple. Tai Yixing smiled and said, I know. However, I still want to see just how monstrous he is. Gu Ming nodded slightly and then retreated to the side. In the distance, Yi Xian looked at Xiao and said in a deep voice, You? Yi Xian smiled and said, Let's fight then. Xiao looked at Yi Xian for a moment and then said, Be careful. After saying that, she retreated to the side. She still chose to believe in Yi Xian. On the other side, Jingji glanced at Yi Xian and then also retreated to the side. Tai Yixing smiled and said, Come. Yi Xian nodded and disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already above Tai Yixing's head. In the next moment, he suddenly drew his sword and slashed. Sword draw to decide life and death. 920 sword draws to decide life and death. With this slash, the surrounding starry sky was directly shattered. A trace of surprise flashed in Tai Yixing's eyes. What a powerful sword skill. As he said that, he flicked his sleeve. Boom. An expanse of sword light shattered, and Yi Xian instantly retreated explosively. However, at the instant that he stopped, Tai Yixing's throat suddenly split open and a sword light appeared. However, at the instant that Tai Yixing's throat split open, his body instantly became illusory. When he appeared again, he was already in front of Yi Xian, and then he smashed his fist towards Yi Xian. Yi Xian's pupils constricted, and he directly utilized the sword domain. Bang! Yi Xian's sword domain forcefully resisted this punch, but his face instantly turned pale. At the same time, he retreated explosively. He didn't retreat to space but directly retreated to a world. Yi Xian was shocked in his heart. He'd never encountered such a situation in the past. Meanwhile, Tai Yixing appeared in front of Yi Xian again. He gazed at Yi Xian and smiled. Do you know what this place is? This is a space-time domain that I've cultivated myself. Now that you're within my space-time domain, I can control your space-time. Yi Xian's face fell when he heard this. He hadn't expected that he would actually be within this fellow's space-time domain. Of course, he hadn't expected that he could actually cultivate a domain in this space-time domain. This wasn't just an ordinary level of terror. Tai Yixing continued, I can control your time at will within my space-time domain. You. Right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly opened his palm, and the green profound sword appeared in his grasp. In the next moment, he vanished on the spot. Tai Yixing was stunned when he witnessed this scene. But Yi Xian actually left his space-time domain just like that? At this moment, Yi Xian was within the same expanse of the starry sky. Meanwhile, Tai Yixing appeared before him. Tai Yixing stared fixedly at Yi Xian. How did you do that? Yi Xian suddenly started laughing. He wasn't laughing because he'd escaped Tai Yixing's space-time domain, he was laughing at his own stupidity. Because he suddenly realized that he'd severely underestimated the green profound sword. The knowledge hidden within the green profound sword was truly too much. Just like earlier, he was completely capable of jumping out of the space-time domain. This meant that even though the sword was forged from the space-time energy of this universe, it had jumped out of this universe. Because the person who'd forged it had jumped out of this universe. If one could fully study this sword, then one could completely jump out of this universe. Even if one couldn't jump out for now, at least one would know the method. Space-time. This universe was formed from time, space, and matter. If one wanted to jump out of this universe, then one had to surpass the time, space, and matter of this universe. Suddenly, Tai Yixing spoke. It's your sword. This chapter isn't over. Please continue to the next page. As he spoke, his gaze descended onto the green profound sword in Yi Xian's hand. All of them looked at Yi Xian's sword. Tai Yixing chuckled. How interesting. I never expected that someone would actually possess such a deep understanding of the space-time Tao and was even able to forge a sword from it. As he spoke, he gazed at Yi Xian. The person who forged this sword was that woman behind you, right? Yi Xian nodded. Yes. Tai Yixing smiled. Where is she now? Yi Xian smiled. Let's continue our battle. As soon as he finished speaking, he walked slowly towards Tai Yixing. Bang! A ray of blood-red light suddenly swept out from within him. The energy of his bloodline. He'd utilized the energy of his bloodline. Because he wanted to see his current limit. Only by knowing one of his limits would he be able to break through them. All of them frowned when they saw Yi Xian transform into a blood-red figure. The energy of his bloodline. What sort of bloodline is that? Jingji glanced at Yi Xian. she noticed that this fellow was even more mysterious than she'd investigated. She knew a little about the origin of this bloodline, and it was Yi Xian's father. However, she knew nothing about Yi Xian's father. It was too mysterious. Yi Xian suddenly vanished on the spot. Sword draw to decide life and death. At this moment Yi Xian's sword draw had overlapped up to 999 times. Because he'd circulated his bloodline to its limits. Tai Yixing's expression instantly changed when he executed this attack. 999 overlapped sword draw to decide life and death. As soon as this attack was executed, the region in an area of over 100 kilometers was instantly obliterated. As for Tai Yixing, who was the target of this attack, he sensed a trace of the aura of death. He didn't dare act carelessly. He raised his right hand slowly and then he chanted silently. In an instant, a barrier of water suddenly appeared around him. Meanwhile, Yi Xian's sword descended. Bang! The barrier of water trembled violently. After a moment of silence, it exploded apart, and Tai Yixing, who was behind the barrier of water, retreated 3 kilometers away. Gu Ming couldn't help but frown when he witnessed this scene. The might of Yi Xian's attack was more than a few times stronger than the attack from before. This fellow's bloodline is actually so terrifying. In the distance, Tai Yixing glanced at his right hand. There was a deep sword scar on it. Tai Yixing shook his head and smiled when he saw this scene. I haven't been injured in many years. I never expected that I would be injured by you, Yi Xian. Yi Xian didn't speak. He just opened his palm and then the green profound sword suddenly flew out. In the distance, Tai water directly punched out. Bang! An expanse of blood-red light erupted, and then a figure retreated repeatedly. It was Yi Xian. However, Tai Yixing had retreated by over 1 kilometer. After Tai Yixing stopped, Yi Xian suddenly vanished on the spot. Tai Yixing's eyes narrowed slightly, and then he suddenly became ethereal. Bang! An expanse of blood-red light suddenly erupted, and then 2 figures retreated explosively at the same time. When Yi Xian stopped moving, a wisp of blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth. Even though his current strength was extremely terrifying, there was still a gap between him and Tai Yixing. Suddenly Tai Yixing said, "Interesting. How truly interesting." As he spoke, he walked slowly towards Yi Xian. Bang! In an instant, an extremely terrifying aura enveloped Yi Xian. Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes while the green profound sword in his hand started to tremble violently. End of this chapter. Chapter 1842. He couldn't beat him. At this time Yi Xian already knew his limits. Even if he used the power of his bloodline, he still wouldn't be able to beat a powerhouse like Tai Shui. The gap was still a little big. However, this was also normal. After all, he had cultivated for at least 1,000,000 years. And how long had Yi Xian been cultivating? However, he wanted to force himself. Fight. Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes, which were blood-red like a sea of blood. Yi Xian suddenly stomped his right foot. Boom. Wherever his foot landed, the space instantly collapsed. And Yi Xian himself had already turned into a blood-red sword light and disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already above Tai Shui's head. The next moment he suddenly drew his sword and slashed. Sword draw to decide life and death. 999 superimposed sword draws to decide life and death. As the sword fell, a sword cry suddenly soared into the sky, and the starry sky directly trembled. A sword strike with all his strength. At this moment Yi Xian didn't dare to hold back in the slightest. Because the person in front of him was the #1 powerhouse in the ancient god world. In front of Yi Xian, Tai Shui watched Yi Xian's sword fall, but his expression was surprisingly calm. When Yi Xian's sword was still a dozen inches away from his head, his entire body suddenly became illusory. Yi Xian's sword fell straight down, directly piercing through Tai Shui's body. But Tai Shui was completely fine. Tai Shui suddenly punched Yi Xian's abdomen. Boom. Yi Xian instantly retreated tens of thousands of feet away, and his body directly cracked. However, Tai Shui's right fist was directly shattered by the sword light. Sword body. At that critical moment, Yi Xian directly activated the sword body. On the other side, Gu Ming, Jingji and Shaowen were all extremely shocked. They were shocked by Tai Shui and also shocked by Yi Xian. They were shocked because the Great One Water had jumped out of this space-time. The reason why Yi Xian's sword didn't work was that Tai Xing had already jumped out of this time and space. He was not in the same time and space as Yi Xian. Space-time suppression. From this, it could be seen that they were not on the same level as the Tai water. And they were shocked by Yi Xian because of Yi Xian's sword body. Just now the three of them thought that even if Yi Xian didn't die he would be severely injured. However, they did not expect that not only was Yi Xian not dead, but he was also uninjured. On the contrary, Tai Xingshui was injured. The three of them looked at Yi Xian. Upon closer inspection, they discovered that Yi Xian's skin was covered with all kinds of tiny sword qi. These sword qi were even thinner than a strand of hair. What kind of physique was this? Gu Ming frowned and he was quite curious. Shaoan glanced at Yi Xian and she was extremely shocked. She knew about Yi Xian's sword body, but she hadn't expected that it would be so terrifying once it was activated. Jingji glanced at Yi Xian. Damn it, this man really has a lot of trump cards. In the distance, Tai Xingshui glanced at his right arm. Not only had his fist been shattered, his entire right arm had been completely cracked and his bones were exposed. Tai Xingshui looked at Yi Xian and said with a smile, "I have to say, you really surprised me. With your strength, even amongst the younger generation of God Ancient Star Domain, no one besides a Gui can fight you." Yi Xian wiped off the blood from the corner of his mouth and said, "You jumped out of this space-time just now." Tai Xingshui nodded. "Yes." Yi Xian smiled and said, "If I'm not wrong, you can only jump out for a short period of time, right?" Tai Xingshui smiled. "So what?" Yi Xian gazed at Tai Xingshui and said, "Again." As soon as he finished speaking, he vanished on the spot. In the distance, Tai Xingshui had become illusory. He'd escaped through space once more. Meanwhile, Yi Xian's sword descended. However, Tai Xingshui's expression suddenly changed drastically. Tai Xingshui had silently retreated 3 kilometers away. Gu Ming and the others were stunned when they witnessed this scene. Yi Xian had actually pushed Tai Xingshui back? Tai Xingshui had jumped out of this space-time. Could Yi Xian have jumped out of it as well? Tai Xingshui stared fixedly at Yi Xian. "You? How could you possibly?" As he spoke, he suddenly gazed at the green profound sword in Yi Xian's hand. "Your sword. It's your sword." Yi Xian gazed at the sword in his hand with a complicated expression on his face. He realized that he'd greatly underestimated the green profound sword forged by Qing. He could have used this sword to jump out of this space-time. Qing had said that the sword had many uses and he hadn't thought too much about it. However, he hadn't expected that the sword would have so many unknown and formidable uses. There were definitely many uses that he didn't know about. It was an omnipotent sword. In the distance, Tai Xingshui suddenly said, "You actually relied on a sword to jump out of this space-time." His expression was extremely unsightly. Yi Xian glanced at Tai Xingshui and said, "What's wrong with you?" Tai Xingshui stared fixedly at Yi Xian and said, "I cultivated for 300,000 years to barely be able to jump out of this space-time, but you actually relied on a sword to do it." Yi Xian frowned slightly. 300,000 years? Is it very difficult to jump out of this space-time? Tai Xingshui said angrily, "Try it without using that sword." Yi Xian put the sword away and gave it a try. "Oh." Yi Xian was somewhat embarrassed. Tai Xingshui said mockingly, "Without that sword you are nothing." Yi Xian held the sword and gave it a try. He directly escaped the space-time of this current universe. Seeing this scene, Tai Xingshui's expression became extremely unsightly. Soon Yi Xian returned to the current universe and looked at Tai Xingshui and said, "You too. It was such a simple thing, but you actually cultivated for 300,000 years. Look at me, I didn't even need to cultivate, I just held this sword and jumped out." At this point he seemed to have thought of something and paused before saying, "Sorry, I forgot that you have no sister. No one made a sword for you." Everyone, this sentence wasn't very lethal, but it was extremely insulting. In the distance, Jingji suddenly couldn't help but turn to look at Shaoan indignantly. "Look, is what he said even human?" Shaoan glanced at Yi Xian and said, "It's a bit too much." Jingji shook his head. "I really want to hammer him to death." Tai Xingshui's expression was extremely unsightly as he stood opposite Yi Xian. He felt like he'd been insulted. Yi Xian spoke abruptly, "So, in terms of the importance of having a sister. You don't have a sister but you've cultivated for 300,000 years. I have a sister, so I don't even need to cultivate to jump out. Jingji couldn't help but become furious. Tai Xingshui, can you stop talking to him? Don't you want to kill him? Just do it. Why are you talking to him? Aren't you afraid of being angered to death by him? Gu Ming couldn't help but glance at Yi Xian and say, Brother Xingshui, kill him. He couldn't take it anymore. So what if you have a sister? He suddenly shook his head when he thought up to here. It's really great to have a sister. Damn it. This fellow relied on this sword to fight me and Tai Xingshui. If it wasn't for this sword, then Yi Xian wouldn't be a match for them at all. Especially that jump out of space-time, the Tai water had cultivated for a total of 300,000 years. What about Yi Xian? That fellow hadn't even cultivated. Isn't that infuriating? The more he thought about it, the angrier he got. Tai Xingshui suddenly smiled and said, Yi Xian, I admit that the person who created this sword isn't ordinary. However, that's the person who created it. What does that have to do with you? Yi Xian gazed at Tai Xingshui. That's my younger sister. Tai Xingshui stared fixedly at Yi Xian. Even you know that it's your younger sister, not you. Yi Xian smiled. If my younger sister is strong, then I'm strong. Everyone was speechless. Tai Xingshui gazed at Yi Xian. Can you be a little more shameless? Yi Xian roared with laughter. Tai Xingshui, why do you have so much nonsense? Let's continue. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly vanished on the spot. A blood-red ray of sword light suddenly flashed through the battlefield. In the distance, Tai Xingshui's eyes flashed ferociously. He charged forward and punched. Bang! In an instant, the starry sky shook violently. Then a ray of sword light shattered and Yi Xian retreated repeatedly. However, as he retreated, he escaped from the current universe's space-time. When he escaped from the current universe's space-time, the powerful force from Tai Xingshui instantly vanished without a trace. Because he was no longer in this space-time. Tai Xingshui's expression instantly became extremely unsightly when he saw this. He could only temporarily escape from the current universe's space-time, but Yi Xian didn't seem to have this restriction. When he thought of this, Tai Xingshui felt even more unbalanced. Why was it that he had cultivated for hundreds of thousands of years to be able to do it, but this guy was able to do it so effortlessly? The more Tai Xingshui thought about it, the more his killing intent surged. He directly escaped from the current universe's space-time and appeared in the same space-time as Yi Xian. As soon as he appeared, Yi Xian suddenly opened his right hand. A ray of sword light flashed through the battlefield. Tai Xingshui immediately punched. Bang! The ray of light shattered. Right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly appeared above him and then a ray of light slashed down. Draw the sword to decide life and death. Tai Xingshui didn't dare act carelessly. Even though there was a gap between him and Yi Xian's sword technique and the sword in his hand weren't ordinary. At the instant that Yi Xian's sword descended, Tai Xingshui's left hand suddenly burst into flames, and then he suddenly smashed his fist forward. Rumble! The space-time there suddenly seethed, and then an expansive light shattered while Yi Xian retreated repeatedly. Tai Xingshui was just about to attack again, but it didn't take long for him to frown. Because a mysterious force had suddenly appeared in the surrounding space-time. Tai Xingshui's expression changed drastically when he saw this mysterious force, and he practically didn't hesitate to vanish on the spot and return to that expansive space-time. This was why he could only enter that unknown expansive space-time for a short period of time. Because that mysterious force rejected all who entered that expansive space-time. As if he'd thought of something, he suddenly gazed at Yi Xian. Yi Xian was still in that expansive space-time, and the mysterious force had enveloped Yi Xian. Tai Xingshui couldn't help but roar with laughter when he witnessed this scene. Yi Xian. This is the consequence of ignorance. At this moment he was extremely happy. Yi Xian was equivalent to courting death. That mysterious force was so strong that even he wasn't a match for it at all. As for Yi Xian, he wasn't a match for it at all. Yi Xian glanced at the mysterious force in the surroundings, and his expression was quite unsightly. Because it was a force that exceeded his understanding. It was absolutely not something he could resist right now. But at this moment, the mysterious force had sealed off this expansive space he resided in. Just as Yi Xian was about to fight to the death, the mysterious force seemed to have discovered something and suddenly retreated like a receding tide. Yi Xian was stunned. Not only was Yi Xian stunned, but Tai Xingxue was also stunned in the space-time outside. His eyes were filled with disbelief. How is this possible? Saying this, he suddenly looked at the sword in Yi Xian's hand. It's the sword in your hand. It's your sword. Yi Xian looked at the green profound sword in his hand. Could it really be because of this sword? Thinking of this, he looked at Tai Xingxue and smiled. Look how great it is to have a sister. It's your fault for not having a sister. Everyone was speechless. Tai Xingxue was so angry that he almost vomited blood. Chapter 1843. When he heard Yi Xian, not only was Tai Xingxue furious to the point of almost spitting out blood, even Jingji couldn't take it anymore. This fellow's words are too infuriating. However, she was even more shocked at this moment. Yi Xian was actually able to rely on this sword to jump out of this universe's space-time. What did this mean? It meant that the person who made the sword was even more terrifying. Of course, she'd personally experienced how terrifying the woman in a plain dress was. She was truly a godlike woman. At this moment, Gu Ming's expression was slightly solemn. The sword in Yi Xian's hand had greatly exceeded his expectations. From this, it could be seen how formidable the person who made the sword was. Gu Ming had a trace of worry in his heart. Right at this moment, Yi Xian returned to the battlefield. With the green profound sword, he could really travel back and forth between the two universes. However, he didn't dare to travel randomly in that unknown space because he was quite afraid of it as well. Even now, he still felt a lingering fear from that mysterious force. Meanwhile, Tai Xingxue suddenly said, "Where is the person who made the sword now?" At this moment, he was even more curious about the woman in a plain dress. Gu Ming looked at Yi Xian as well. He was similarly curious about the woman in a plain dress. Exactly how strong is she? Originally, he was very confident that he could defeat her. But now he wasn't completely confident anymore. However, he wanted to fight her even more now. When had he ever been afraid of anyone? Yi Xian didn't answer Tai Xingxue and he slowly closed his eyes. At this moment he was very excited because he'd discovered a formidable ability of the green profound sword, and that was the ability to travel freely between two different spaces. With this ability he could be said to be in an invincible position forever. Even if he faced Tai Xingxue, his opponent wouldn't be able to do anything to him. Most importantly, he could use this sword to study its principles, and then rely on his own ability to jump out of this expansive space. A new door had opened for him. Right at this moment, Gu Ming suddenly said, "The sword in his hand." The sword. Tai Xingxue's eyes narrowed as he gazed at the sword in Yi Xian's hand. At this moment he intended to seize the sword. Without any hesitation, Tai Xingxue suddenly vanished on the spot. At practically the same time, Yi Xian suddenly drew his sword and slashed. Rumble. The sword light shattered and Yi Xian instantly retreated. In the instant that he retreated, he directly escaped from the space-time of this universe. Tai Xingxue, who was about to follow up with another attack, was stunned. How were they supposed to fight? Although he could also appear in this universe's space-time, he didn't dare to fight with Yi Xian there. Yi Xian wasn't afraid of that mysterious force, but he was. Tai Yixing looked at Yi Xian and mocked, "Yi Xian, are you still a man? So then come out and we'll fight to the death." Yi Xian laughed and said, "If you are a man, then come in. We will fight to the death." Tai Yixing stared at Yi Xian. "You don't want to come out?" As he spoke, he looked at the awareness realm cultivator and Xiaoan. "You can escape, but what about them?" Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, "I'll give it a try." As he spoke, he suddenly appeared by Xiaoan and Ji Jing's side and took their hands. A moment later, the three of them vanished at the same time, and they were out of this universe's space-time when they appeared again. Tai Yixing and Ancient Fate were stunned. "He can take others in? What the hell?" Xiaoan and Jingji, who stood by Yi Xian's side, were quite stunned as well. They hadn't imagined that Yi Xian would actually be able to take them in. What's going on? Jingji was quite excited. She ceaselessly sized up the surroundings because such an opportunity was rare. If she could familiarize herself with this expansive space-time, then she might be able to use her understanding of space-time to enter again in the future. Meanwhile, Yi Xian had brought her and Xiaoan back into the outside world. Jingji hurriedly gazed at Yi Xian. "Stay a little longer." Yi Xian was speechless. She wants to stay a little longer. I can't let her off so easily. Tai Yixing's expression was terrifyingly gloomy, and he stared fixedly at the sword in Yi Xian's hand. This sword can even take others in. What kind of sword is this? At this moment Gu Ming suddenly said in a deep voice, rumor has it that this person also has a Xiao Ta. That Xiao Ta is said to last 100 years inside and a day outside. I thought it was fake before, but now it seems that this pagoda might really be that magical. Hearing this, Tai Yixing's eyes narrowed. 2 divine objects. He slowly clenched his right hand. If these 2 divine objects fell into his hands, he would definitely become the strongest person in the history of this universe. However, he didn't make a move and said, "Let's go." After speaking, he turned around and left. Gu Ming frowned, but he didn't ask any more questions and also turned around and left. Seeing the 2 of them leave, Xiaoan, who stood by Yi Xian's side, frowned. What do they mean? Jingji said indifferently, what do they mean? It's obvious. They can't do anything to Yi Xian now, so they're going back to discuss how to deal with this guy. Xiaoan was silent. Yi Xian could escape this space-time at will. It could be said that as long as he didn't want to fight to the death, even Tai Yixing couldn't do anything to him. Therefore, even if Tai Yixing joined forces with Gu Ming, it would be meaningless. At this moment, Jingji suddenly said, "You have to be careful. If I were them, I would definitely attack your friends and family. As long as I capture your friends and family, you have to fight even if you don't want to, unless you want to watch them die." Xiaoan frowned slightly. Tai Yixing wouldn't do such a despicable thing, right? Naive. Jingji sneered. Under normal circumstances, he would indeed not do such a despicable thing, but don't overlook one point, and that is that this fellow possesses 2 super divine objects, and these 2 divine objects are things that the supreme life water cannot give up. For these 2 divine objects, Tai Yixing won't adhere to his **T principles. Moreover, the 2 of them don't dare to give this guy too much time. Therefore, they will definitely attack again, and when they do, they will definitely be fully prepared. Yi Xian nodded. So we have to make some preparations. Jingji gazed at Yi Xian. What preparations? According to what I know, you seem to have quite a lot of friends and family. Yi Xian said, then what do you think I should do now? Jingji fell silent for a moment and then he said, there are 2 ways. The first is to call your younger sister over. Once she appears, all the troubles will disappear. Yi Xian said, tell me about the second. Jingji glanced at Yi Xian and then he said, the second is to take all your friends and family into Xiaota. It should be possible for you as well, but it might be a bit more troublesome. Yi Xian smiled. There's a third way. Jingji frowned slightly. What way? Yi Xian said, to the ancient god world. Jingji's eyes narrowed slightly. You want to go to the ancient god world? Yi Xian smiled. Can't I? Jingji said in a low voice. That's their headquarters. If you go there. Speaking of this, she frowned again. Even the 2 of them can't do anything to you, so the rest of them certainly can't do anything to you. Moreover, with your strength, whether it is the ancient demon race or the greater one-sex powerhouses, for you, I'm afraid it will only be a matter of one sword. Saying this, her pupils suddenly shrank. She had always neglected a problem, and that was Yi Xian's strength. Now Yi Xian could not even do anything to ancient fate and greater one life water. To some extent, he was already comparable to super powerhouses like Greater One Life Water and Ancient Fate. If he went to the ancient god world, it would undoubtedly be a great disaster for the ancient demon race and Greater One race. As if thinking of something, Jingji said, but what about your family and friends here? They are now your biggest weakness and they will never let go of this weakness. They will definitely use it against you. Or do you really have the heart to leave them alone? As long as they go to Azure Province, then you, Yi Xian, will be in an absolute passive position. If you fight, Azure Province will be destroyed. If you don't fight, then you will have to surrender. Saying this, she sighed softly. Greater One Life Water retreated just now, but in reality he was retreating in order to advance. Now that he has retreated, your situation has become even more difficult. Yi Xian smiled. Then what do you think I should do now? Jingji said in a low voice. The best way is to call for help. If your sister comes out, what ancient fate, what greater one life water, they are all ants. Yi Xian, Jingji suddenly said, you can't contact her, can you? Yi Xian nodded. Jingji frowned slightly. Why can't you contact her? Yi Xian said, she may have already left this universe. Jingji was silent for a moment, then said, then there is no point in you going to the ancient god world. You can only kill the Greater One Life Water and the ancient fate. Saying this, she shook her head. But the problem is, even if the three of us work together, we cannot kill the ancient fate and the Greater One Life Water. Although the ancient fate and the Greater One Life Water couldn't do anything to Yi Xian couldn't do anything to the ancient fate and the Greater One Life Water either. The only difference was that Yi Xian had too many things to worry about. And these things were his fatal weakness. If she hadn't seen how scary the plain-clothed woman was, she would have done the same thing. Because Yi Xian would have obediently submitted. Jingji sighed. Not only was Yi Xian's situation getting worse, but it was also the same for her and the Saint Church. Because the ancient demon and the Greater One would never let her and the Saint Church go. At this moment, the space in front of Jingji suddenly trembled. Yi Xian and Shaoan looked at her, and then Jingji suddenly looked up at Yi Xian. You don't have to feel bad. Yi Xian didn't understand and he asked, why? Jingji said, let me ask you something. How strong is your father? Yi Xian froze and then he said, why do you ask? Jingji said, I just received news that the Stellar Fate sect couldn't find your sister, but they found your father. Yi Xian's face darkened. They aren't going to find my father, are they? Jingji nodded. The Greater One Life Water and the Ancient Fate have already gone to find your father. So what I want to know is, how strong is your father? Yi Xian thought about it and then he said, he's a little stronger than me. Jingji shook her head. Then why don't you go and save your father? Yi Xian was speechless. Chapter 1844. Save my father? Yi Xian was speechless. Seeing that Yi Xian didn't speak, Jingji frowned. What are you waiting for? If you're late, your father will be gone. Yi Xian was puzzled. Jingji, I don't understand why they want to find my father. Jingji asked in a deep voice, was your small pagoda left to you by your father? Yi Xian nodded. Yes. Jingji knew. That's the reason. Yi Xian was still puzzled. Then they can just kill me. Why do they want to find my father? Jingji thought for a moment and said, it should be because they are curious. Also, they might want to eliminate any future troubles. Think about it, if they kill you, will your father let it go? He definitely won't let it go. As she spoke, she looked at Yi Xian. Why are you still asking questions? Why aren't you going to save you? Speaking of this, she seemed to have thought of something and narrowed her eyes. Your father is not weak. Yi Xian smiled. A little stronger than me. Jingji stared at Yi Xian. Really, just a little? Yi Xian nodded and said seriously, a little. Jingji shook his head. You never speak the truth. Yi Xian was speechless. Jingji asked again, do you want to go? Actually, she also wanted to see Yi Xian's father. What kind of person could give birth to such a shameless fellow? Yi Xian nodded. Of course. Where are they? Jingji said solemnly, the North Pole region in the Divine Ancient Star region. It's very far away from here. It's said that your father appeared there. The experts of Star Life Gate have already rushed there. Yi Xian frowned. His father hadn't left this universe? Was he worried about him? As soon as this thought appeared, he denied it himself. His father couldn't wait for him to live a hard life. It was impossible for him to deliberately stay behind to help him. Since it wasn't him, then why did his father stay behind? He was also a little curious. Jingji suddenly said, let's go to the Divine Ancient Star Field. Yi Xian nodded. All right. With that said, the three of them disappeared on the spot. Somewhere in the starry sky, Tai Shui was flying through the air with Ancient Fate next to him. They were on their way back to the ancient god world. Gu Ming suddenly said, Brother Xing Shui, I don't think we need to look for Yi Xian's father. Although Yi Xian can use the divine sword to escape from this spacetime, his family and friends are still here. As long as we target his family and friends, he will have no choice but to fight us. Tai Yi Water Dao, I know. Gu Ming was a little confused. Since Brother Xing Shui knows, then why? Tai Yixing smiled and said, Brother Gu Ming, aren't you curious about Yi Xian's background? Yi Xian's background. Gu Ming was silent. He was naturally curious about Yi Xian's background, especially the two people behind Yi Xian, especially the plain-dressed woman. This person was able to forge that kind of divine sword, so he was definitely not an ordinary person. He was most likely a superior blacksmith. Tai Yixing continued, The most terrifying thing about Yi Xian is not his own strength, but the person behind him. To be able to nurture such a genius, the person behind him is definitely not simple. Especially that plain-dressed woman. This person can fuse the Tao of spacetime into the sword. This ability. Saying this, a hint of worry flashed in his eyes. This woman is not simple. I never thought that our universe would have such a blacksmith. Gu Ming nodded. Indeed, she is not simple. But why have we never heard of this woman? Tai Yixing nodded slightly. Logically speaking, with such ability, this woman should not be unknown, but neither of us have heard of her. Saying this, he frowned. Could it be that the rumors are true? This Yi Xian and that plain-dressed woman are outsiders? Gu Ming immediately shook his head. Impossible. Tai Yixing looked at Gu Ming. Why is it impossible? Gu Ming said in a low voice. I've investigated Yi Xian before. This person is flashy and likes to deceive people. The foreign guests he mentioned must be fabricated by him to deceive us. Tai Yixing pondered for a moment and said, no matter what, since the Star Life Gate has found this person's father, we should go and meet him. I want to see how extraordinary the person behind Yi Xian is. Gu Ming nodded. That's true. He was also very curious about the person behind Yi Xian. Tai Yixing suddenly smiled. I hope they are stronger. Otherwise it would be too boring. Gu Ming also smiled. Indeed. Saying this, the two smiled and disappeared into the endless starry sky. On the other side, Yi Xian and the other two were also rushing to the ancient god star field. However, they were not as slow as Tai Yixing and Gu Ming. After all, Yi Xian had the azure profound sword. Although he did not know the exact location of the ancient god world, Shaoan and Jingji knew. It only took the three of them less than a dozen breaths to reach the ancient god star field. When they appeared in the ancient god star field, Shaoan and Jingji's expressions became serious. They were shocked by this speed. One had to know that even with their strength, it would take at least half a month to reach the ancient god star field from where they were just now. However, Yi Xian only used less than a dozen breaths of time. This was too terrifying. Jingji suddenly said, this sword of yours can ignore the space-time of this current universe. Saying this, she took a deep look at the azure profound sword in Yi Xian's hand, and a complicated look flashed in her eyes. Your sister is not an ordinary kind of terrifying. Hearing this, Yi Xian laughed. Qingren and I are both very powerful. Jingji said calmly, I don't know why young Master Yi is so powerful. Yi Xian said seriously, I have such a powerful sister. Isn't that powerful? Jingji's expression froze. After a moment she gave him a thumbs up. Young Master Yi's skin is so thick it's rare to see. I'm convinced. Yi Xian was speechless. Shaoan suddenly glanced around with a complicated expression. She had left this place and now that she had returned, her feelings were naturally complicated. Yi Xian walked over to Shaoan and said softly, do you want to return to the hallowed halls to take a look? At the side, Jingji suddenly smiled and said, yes. Martial Lord, and do you want to go back and take a look? Shaoan glanced at Jingji and said indifferently, there's no need. Jingji smiled and didn't say anything else. The enmity between her and Shaoan had always existed, but she understood that now wasn't the time for internal strife. They had to deal with the hallowed halls and the ancient devil race first. These two were even more of a threat. Yi Xian suddenly said, let's go to the North Pole starfield. Jingji hesitated for a moment and said, I have to return to the hallowed halls to make some arrangements. Yi Xian asked, what arrangements? Jingji smiled and said, now that I'm on your side, do you think the ancient demons and the very ones will let the hallowed halls go? If I don't make some arrangements, I'm afraid the hallowed halls will be caught off guard. Yi Xian nodded. That's true. Let's go to the hallowed halls first. Jingji looked at Shaoan and smiled. Just as she was about to speak, Yi Xian suddenly said, Miss Jingji, let's go. Jingji glanced at Yi Xian and smiled. The three of them headed to the hallowed halls. Yi Xian looked at Shaoan. He could tell that Shaoan wanted to return to the hallowed halls. But that was normal. After all, she was the sacred leader of the hallowed halls. After a while, the three of them arrived at the hallowed halls. The hallowed halls were located in Sacred, an independent small world. As soon as they entered Sacred, an old man in a white robe appeared in front of them. When the old man in the white robe saw Shaoan, his face changed. You are martial lord and... Xiao An's expression was calm and she didn't speak. As for the old man in the white robe, his eyes were filled with vigilance as if he was facing a great enemy. Jingji suddenly said, "Can't you see me?" Hearing this, the old man in the white robe looked at Jingji and he hurriedly bowed respectfully. "Sacred leader." Jingji said indifferently, "Don't be so nervous. Martial lord and won't eat you." The old man in the white robe glanced at Xiao An again and he was slightly puzzled. Why is the sacred leader and martial lord and together? Have they reconciled? Jingji suddenly said, "Pass down the order. Ask all the hallowed halls experts outside to return to the hallowed halls immediately." The old man in the white robe was stunned. He was about to ask something but when he saw Jingji frown he hurriedly said, "Yes." After saying this he turned around and disappeared. Xiao An suddenly said, "I'm going to see master." After saying this she turned around and walked to the other side. Jingji glanced at Xiao An and didn't speak. The master Xiao An was referring to was her father. Xian hurriedly followed as well. He was also afraid that the two women would suddenly start fighting. Before long Xian followed Xiao An to a cave at the back of the mountain. In this cave there were hundreds of memorial tablets. All of them were the memorial tablets of the ancestors of the hallowed halls. There were a lot of them. Although cultivation to a certain extent could increase one's lifespan, it wasn't true eternal life. There would eventually be a day when one would turn to dust. Besides that, there were also some who died unnaturally. Xiao An walked to one of the memorial tablets, slowly knelt down and fell silent. After a moment of silence Xian retreated. Outside Jingji was also there. Xian chuckled and said, "Miss Jingji." Jingji shook his head. "Don't say anything because I know what you're going to say." Xian nodded. All right. He knew that the matter between Xiao An and Jingji wasn't something that she could mediate. Unless they both became his women. Holy shit. Xian was shocked by his own thought. Why would he have such a thought? At this moment, a phantom suddenly appeared in front of Jingji. The phantom glanced at Xian wanting to say something but hesitating. Jingji said calmly, "Young Master Yi is not an outsider. Just say what you want." The phantom nodded slightly. The Starfate Gate has been making a big move recently. They've set up a mysterious array in the North Pole star region. I don't know what kind of array it is, but the Starfate Gate has sent at least tens of thousands of experts, including the sect master of the Starfate Gate. Hearing this, Jingji frowned. What are they going to do? The phantom shook his head. I don't know. Jingji suddenly looked at Xian with an extremely solemn expression. They're making such a big move. They might be targeting your father. Your father is in danger. Xian was speechless. Chapter 1845. Targeting his father? Xian was speechless. Why did he have to target Qing'er and his father? Was he unworthy? Suddenly Zijing asked, "How strong is your father?" She had investigated Xian's father and only knew that he was the Sword League's sword master. To be honest, the Sword League wasn't much. However, in her opinion, Xian's father was no ordinary person. After all, Xian's bloodline wasn't simple. Xian said, "A little stronger than me." Zijing looked at Xian. "Tell me the truth." Xian said with a smile, "I think it's a 50-50 chance." 50-50. Zijing frowned. Really? Xian nodded and said seriously, "Absolutely." Zijing glanced at Xian, "As if I'd believe you." Xian was speechless. At this time the white-robed old man suddenly appeared in front of Zijing. The white-robed old man bowed. "Holy Lord, our people have rushed back to the Holy Hall and await your orders." Zijing nodded. "Got it." The white-robed old man glanced at Xian then retreated. Zijing suddenly looked at the cave. She smiled. "She cares about you." Xian frowned. "Xiao An?" Zijing nodded. "Yes. If it weren't for you she would have attacked me." Xian was silent for a moment then said, "The conflict between the two of you." Zijing suddenly smiled. "The old man inside said that I'm not as good as her, but it turns out that I'm not any worse than her." With that she turned and left. Xian glanced at Zijing. He could feel that Zijing still held a lot of resentment towards her father. Xian sighed softly. He didn't try to persuade Zijing because he hadn't experienced what Zijing had gone through, so he wasn't qualified to do so. One shouldn't persuade others to do good without suffering. At this moment Xiaoan walked out. Xiaoan walked up to Yi Xian, looked around and then said softly, "This is no longer the place we are familiar with." Yi Xian chuckled. "I'm here." Xiaoan looked at Yi Xian and didn't say anything. Yi Xian suddenly grabbed Anne's hand. "Let's go." After saying that, he pulled Xiaoan and walked into the distance. This time Xiaoan didn't resist and let Yi Xian pull him. Yi Xian turned to Xiaoan and smiled. "Thank you." Xiaoan was puzzled. "What are you thanking me for?" Yi Xian said, "For my sake you didn't choose to fight Miss Jingji at this time." After a moment of silence Xiaoan said, "You need her and the Templars' help now." Yi Xian was about to speak when Jingji suddenly appeared in front of the two of them. She glanced at the two of them holding hands and said with a smile, "Don't tell me you two are really together?" Yi Xian smiled. "Miss Jingji, do you have any news?" Jingji nodded. "I just received news that the Supreme Life Water and Ancient Fate have arrived in the ancient god world." Yi Xian frowned. "So fast?" Jingji nodded. "They should have received help from the Stellar Life Gate." Yi Xian said solemnly, "What kind of power is the Stellar Life Gate?" Jingji knew, it's a power that likes to study all sorts of things, especially the Tao of spacetime. Their overall strength isn't particularly strong, but it isn't weak either because they still have a living god emperor. However, no one has seen him before. They are experts in spacetime and the teleporter they built is amazing. Under normal circumstances, it would take us half a month to get to where you are, but through their teleporter, the time can be reduced to a few days. With the help of elites like the Supreme Life Water and Ancient Fate, it can be even faster. Because they are strong enough, they can ignore the effects of the spacetime teleporter. Saying this, she frowned. They are a public power and they don't get involved in worldly affairs. I didn't expect that they would openly side with the ancient demons and the very ones. The ancient demons and the very ones must have promised them something. Xiaoan suddenly said, "The green profound sword." Jingji nodded when he heard this. "Only the azure sword and your tiny pagoda are capable of making the Stargate side with them. Because with the characters of those fellows, they'll definitely want to study your tiny pagoda and the azure sword." Yi Xian said, "Your people said that the Stellar Life Gate is building a teleporter in the North Pole starfield. Do you have any specific information?" Jingji shook his head. "That place is full of teleporters. Our people can't get in, so we don't know what they are building. However, according to my speculation, they might be targeting your father." Yi Xian was speechless. Suddenly Xiaoan said, "To the North Pole starfield." Yi Xian nodded. "Let's go." He wanted to see how these people were going to target his father. Jingji suddenly said, "Are we going just like that?" Yi Xian looked at Jingji. "What else?" Jingji said, "You don't seem to be worried about your father at all. Tell me honestly, isn't your father very strong?" Yi Xian said, "Miss Jingji, I told you before. My father is only a little stronger than me." "It's true." Jingji frowned. "Aren't you worried about him? He's your father. There are 3 super forces targeting him. Aren't you afraid that he will be killed by them?" Yi Xian blinked. Then he said, "A little scared." Jingji was speechless. At this moment Yi Xian suddenly said, "Let's go." After saying that, he disappeared into the horizon with Xiao and Jingji frowned. "Unfilial fellow." After saying that, she also disappeared. The North Pole starfield was located in the northernmost part of the divine ancient star field. It was desolate and barren, so there were very few humans here. Even if there were, they were weak rogue cultivators. At this moment, tens of thousands of super experts were gathered in a mountain range in the North Pole starfield. Star Fate Sect. An old man stood in front of a valley. He looked down with a frown. This person was the sect master of the Star Fate Sect, Zhou Xian. In the valley below there was a huge astral formation. However, this formation was not yet complete, because there were still hundreds of formation masters from the Stellar Fate Gate continuously drawing some strange runes at the edge of it. At this moment 2 middle-aged men suddenly appeared beside Zhou Xian. They were Gu Ming and Taishe. The 2 of them would have needed half a month to reach the divine ancient star field, but with the help of the Star Fate Sect, the time had been shortened to a few days. Zhou Xian suddenly said, "Yi Xian has arrived at the divine ancient star field." Tai Yishui frowned. "So fast?" Zhou Xian smiled. It seems like it is really as you said. The space-time Tao contained in that sword really surpasses the space-time of this universe. Tai Yishui nodded. This person was able to travel from so far away to here. It seems like the space-time Tao contained in that sword far exceeds our expectations. Dao Xingzi narrowed his eyes. The two of you, my Starfate sect doesn't care who owns this sword, but no matter who obtains it, you must first let my Starfate sect study it for 3 months. Tai Yishui smiled. Of course. As he spoke, he looked at Gu Ming. Gu Ming smiled slightly. No problem. Dao Xingzi nodded. He looked at the formation below and said, once this formation succeeds, it will be able to reverse the space-time here and find the space-time of that man in green. Tai Yishui frowned slightly. You're not just reversing space-time. Dao Xingzi smiled. Yes, it's not just reversing the space-time here, it's also exchanging space-time. In other words, the space-time here and the space-time of that man in green. Gu Ming frowned. Is that possible? Dao Xingzi smiled. Brother Gu Ming, of course it's possible. The space-time Tao is boundlessly profound. According to my Tao Star Sect's ancestor, if the space-time Tao is researched to the extreme, then not only can it reverse space-time, it can also reverse the future. It is to reverse the past space-time and the present space-time and the future space-time. Tai Yishui said in a low voice, has your Tao Star Sect's ancestor ever done it? Dao Xingzi shook his head. Not even in death. Tai Yishui nodded. That's indeed impossible. Dao Xingzi said softly, I really want to see the sword in young Master Ye's hand. Tai Yishui smiled. Isn't he in the ancient god star field right now? Once we deal with his father, it will be very easy to deal with him. Although Yi Xian could escape from this space-time, the people around Yi Xian did not have this ability. Dao Xingzi nodded slightly. He looked down and at this moment, the enormous starlight formation below suddenly trembled. Gu Ming asked. Is it done? Dao Xingzi nodded. He raised his hands and chanted some unknown incantation. Gradually, the space-time above the starlight formation began to distort. The Star Life Sect's experts also began to chant incantations. The space-time above the starlight formation became more and more distorted and abstract. Gu Ming and Tai Yishui stared at the distorted and abstract space-time. Very quickly, blurry figures appeared within the space-time. Suddenly, a green-clothed man appeared within the warped expanse of space. Seeing this, a trace of excitement flashed through Dao Xingzi's eyes and he hurriedly roared. Space-time swap. Below, the Star Life Sect's experts roared in unison. Space-time swap. Bang. The space-time above the starlight formation became illusory. When it became completely translucent, a man in green clothes appeared before everyone's eyes. His main body. However, he wasn't in this space-time. He was in another unknown space-time and he just appeared here in a special way. At this moment, a white furry little fellow appeared on the green-robed man's shoulder. She looked around curiously. Dao Xingzi stroked his beard and smiled. Found him. In the distance, the white little fellow turned to look at the man in green clothes with a bewildered expression. Why did he come here? Even though Dao Xingzi and the others had looked for the man in green clothes, he'd come here of his own accord. The man spoke indifferently. That unfilial son of mine must have gotten into trouble again. If he doesn't give me a reasonable explanation, then I'll break his legs. The white little fellow was speechless. In the distance, Dao Xingzi turned to look at Gu Ming and Tai Yishui. Let's do it. This formation consumes a lot of energy and we won't be able to hold on for long. Tai Yishui turned to look at Gu Ming and smiled. Brother Gu Ming, do you want to do it or should I? Gu Ming glanced at the man in green clothes and grinned. I don't care. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.